Hey guys, tonight we begin with the life as the first to use fire. A world of stinging smoke, damp kindling, and the constant threat of your only flame vanishing in the rain. You huddle close to a flickering ember, the clan watching from the dark, unsure if you've tamed something sacred or just borrowed trouble. Either way, survival now depends on keeping it alive. So, while you're getting comfortable, feel free to tap like and subscribe if this kind of calm, late-night history is your thing. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your city and what time it was when you pressed play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The smell is the first thing that hits you, sharp and unnatural, drifting through the trees like a warning wrapped in curiosity. You freeze mid-step, crouched low behind a broad patch of ferns, your hand gripping a half-broken stick that was meant to scare off snakes, not whatever this is. There's something acrid in the air, something wild and electric, mixed with the unmistakable scent of meat. Meat that's not just dead, but hot. You sniff again, confused. This doesn't smell like a kill. It smells better, like something you didn't know your body craved until this very moment. Rich, burned, savory in a way that makes your empty belly twist and ache with a hunger that forgets fear. A few heartbeats ago, everything was as it always is, damp ground. Bird calls echoing between the trees, wind tugging at the shaggy fur tied around your shoulders. Then the sky cracked open. No warning, just a brilliant bolt that stabbed from above and slammed into the world with a noise so deep it made your ribs buzz. You flung yourself flat in the ferns. When you looked up, the world had changed. A tree was on fire. Really on fire. Not just smoldering or smoking like a careless ember. Burning top to roots. A pillar of flame thrashing in the wind. You'd seen smoke before. You'd seen lightning. But this was something alive. The others are still scattered, some hiding, some yelling, some frozen like you, too confused to run and too mesmerized to look away. Even the usual forest noise has gone quiet. The birds have vanished. The bugs have stopped buzzing. It's just the fire now, crackling, spitting sparks, lighting the trees with dancing shadows that twist and jump like spirits. And then you see it. Just past the burning trunk, lying motionless in the brush, is a deer, or what's left of one. Its legs are curled beneath its body. Steam rises from its flanks. The fur is scorched clean in places, revealing glistening meat beneath, sizzling with every gust of heat. You've seen death, sure. You've helped butcher kills, scraped skin from bone, gnawed cold strips of meat when the day was good and the hunt was kind. But this looks different. You don't have a word for cooked. You only have instinct. And your instincts are telling you two conflicting things at once. This is dangerous, and this is dinner. One of the elders steps out from the brush. Her white hair hangs in clumps, and her eyes are narrowed in the same way they get when she's trying to remember something too old to have words. She inches forward, grabs a long stick, and nudges the deer's haunch. It crumbles slightly beneath the pressure, a soft hiss rising from the flesh. She snatches the stick back like it's bitten her, but she doesn't run. Instead, she circles the carcass slowly, eyes wary, nostrils flaring. She turns and mutters something under her breath to the others, and although you can't make out the words, you understand the tone. Curiosity is winning. Another figure bolts forward. It's one of the younger hunters, the kind who jumps before thinking and thinks mostly in muscle. He lunges toward the carcass, jabs his sharpened spear into a hunk of exposed meat, and yanks it free with a triumphant grunt. Everyone tenses. You're half expecting the sky to open again, to punish this theft of divine food. But nothing happens. No thunder. No second strike. Just the sound of him chewing. It's silent for a long moment. Then he nods. His grin spreads wide, and a low sound comes from his throat, something halfway between a laugh and a groan of satisfaction. It breaks the tension like a rock through ice. Suddenly, everyone is moving. Half the clan surges forward, emboldened by the lack of cosmic retribution. The other half hangs back, murmuring about curses and sky spirits, and what happens to greedy hands. You move too, slower, heart pounding as you inch closer to the heat. The fire is terrifying up close. You can feel it before you reach it. Waves of hot air that make your skin tingle and your eyes water. The deer is surrounded by scorched plants and sizzling moss. The earth itself looking blackened and angry. But your hunger is stronger than your fear. You stab your stick forward, jabbing at a piece of meat that looks less singed than the rest. You fumble it, drop it, burn your knuckles trying to snatch it up. Finally, you manage to grip the prize and retreat, breathing hard. The meat is hot, too hot. You juggle it from hand to hand, blowing on it furiously until it's cool enough to tear off a bite. And then you understand. It melts. That's the only way to describe it. The chewiness you've come to expect from raw strips of animal is gone, replaced by something softer, richer. Your mouth fills with flavor you didn't know existed. It's not just satisfying, it's transforming. It makes you wonder if maybe this is what food is supposed to taste like. The moment doesn't last. The fire has ideas of its own. A sudden wind shift sends a shower of sparks into the underbrush, and within seconds, the ground near you lights up like dry tinder. Someone yells. Someone else drops their precious meat and bolts. Panic spreads faster than the flames. You run, clutching your half-eaten portion like a treasure, weaving through trees as the forest behind you begins to scream in smoke and flame. Branches fall, leaves blacken. The blaze doesn't chase you directly, but it doesn't need to. You run because something ancient in your bones says run now or burn. Eventually, far from the crackling chaos, your people regroup. Not all of them. You don't know how many made it. But those who did are coughing and blinking and covered in soot. And every one of them is holding meat. Greasy, blackened, slightly charred, but cooked. You sit in a circle, wide-eyed, chewing in silence. And as the fire's orange glow fades from the horizon, replaced by the chill blue of night, a strange mood settles over the group. Not peace, not joy, not even fear anymore. Something else. Something like awe. No one says it out loud, but you all know it now. The fire is powerful, dangerous, alive in a way that water, wind, or stone never could be. It gives and it takes. And tonight, for whatever reason, it gave you something new. A glimpse of warmth, a full belly, the idea that this power could be more than just a freak of the storm. You glance at the elder across the circle. Her eyes are still on the horizon, where the smoke trails into the sky like a ghost. Her hands are steady now, wrapped around her half-birthed morsel, and you wonder if she's thinking the same thing you are. How do we find it again? How do we make it stay? You return to the clearing just before dawn, when the air still holds the chill of night and the ground beneath your feet is slick with dew. The forest is hushed, not with fear now, but with a kind of waiting. You creep forward slowly, brushing past damp leaves, stepping around cold ash. In the dark, the blackened clearing feels like the aftermath of something sacred, or something cursed. The tree that had burst into flame yesterday still stands, or at least what's left of it. A twisted trunk, half-hollowed and glistening with streaks of sap turned to pitch, its edges glowing faintly in the shadows. Beneath it, nestled among scorched roots and curled bark, is your prize. A pocket of flame, small but stubborn, flickering weakly in the windless calm. You stare at it for a long moment. It's smaller than you remember. Less a roaring monster, more a curled animal refusing to die. The light dances low, licking at bits of char and dry leaf, trying to stay alive without any help. Your mouth is dry. Your fingers twitch. You don't know what exactly you're doing, only that you want that fire. Need it. The memory of warm meat still clings to your senses. The way it filled your chest, the way it softened your limbs. You want that again. And maybe more. Maybe warmth on nights like this. Maybe a way to scare off the wolves. Maybe something new, something yours. You glance around to make sure you're alone. You don't know why. It's not like anyone told you not to do this. But there's a heaviness in your chest, like you're sneaking into a place you shouldn't, touching something sacred. You crouch low and approach the flame slowly, as if it might light up and bite you. It doesn't. It crackles softly, the way a tired fire does when it's almost out of ideas. You didn't bring anything fancy. There's no leather sack or clever tool. Just a stick, long, thin, already dry, and a handful of dry moss tucked into the fold of your belt. You inch closer, ease the stick into the flame, and wait. Nothing happens at first. Then the end begins to glow. Just a faint orange, then red, and then, suddenly, a tiny tongue of fire licks up, catching the stick with a surprising hunger. You yelp and nearly drop it, stumbling backward, waving your hand at the smoke curling toward your face. You've done it. You've stolen the flame. Well, not stolen, exactly. It was dying. No one owned it. But still, your heart races. You hold the burning stick like it might explode. It's not like yesterday's raging fire. It's a fragile, twitchy thing. The wind nudges it, and you panic, shielding it with your body. You wrap the moss gently around the base, trying to feed it, and the flame flares brighter. It's working. It's actually working. You take off running. Not fast, you're too scared of the wind blowing it out, but quick enough to feel like you're carrying something forbidden. Every step is careful. Every branch overhead feels like a trap. Gust of breeze sends sparks scattering, and you crouch low to shield the flame, whispering nonsense to it like it's a child in pain. You keep checking the tip of the stick, paranoid that the glow has dimmed. Each time, it's still there. Each time, it feels like a miracle. But miracles are not patient. Halfway back to camp, the flame wavers. You're climbing a slope, trying to navigate a slick patch of rock. When the wind picks up again, the smoke shifts. The tiny fire flickers and goes out. You freeze. You stare at the dead stick in your hand, blinking. The wood is still warm. The tip glows faintly for a moment longer, then vanishes into gray. The moss crumbles. You kneel on the ground, shaking the stick like maybe there's a hidden ember tucked inside, something you missed. But it's gone. It was yours. And it's gone. You sit there for a long time, surrounded by damp trees and dawn shadows, clutching the blackened stick like a grave marker. There's something hollow in your chest, not just the disappointment, but a deeper ache. The flame had felt alive, like company, like a secret you'd finally been let in on. And now it's vanished, leaving behind nothing but smoke and ash. You consider going back. You still know where the fire was. But what if it's gone too? What if the wind took it, or the rain finished what time had already started? You can't be sure. And besides, what if someone sees you? What if they laugh? Or worse, what if they're scared of you? You walk back to camp in silence. When you arrive, no one notices at first. The others are gathered near the cave, chewing yesterday's leftovers, cold now and stiff. The elder from before is humming under her breath, slowly grinding seeds between two stones. You sit down beside them, placing the charred stick on the ground without explanation. A few heads turn. One child leans forward and pokes it, then wrinkles her nose at the smell. You expect someone to ask. No one does. But that night, when the wind howls through the trees, and the cold creeps in like it always does, you catch someone glancing at the stick again, just for a moment. And you wonder if they too felt what you felt. If they remember the heat, the crackle, the way the fire curled around the meat like it was blessing it. The next day, you try again. You wait until the light is low, until the others are distracted, then sneak back to the place where the fire had lived. This time, you bring more moss. You find a sturdier stick. You break apart bark and tuck it under your arm, cradling it like a bundle of kindling dreams. When you reach the clearing, the fire is still there, barely. Just a few weak embers hiding under a damp pile of leaves, like a secret barely clinging to memory. You kneel down, blow softly, feed it with bark and moss, shield it from the wind. This time, it flares up with more strength. This time, you know how to carry it. The third time someone catches fire, it's a little less funny. The first time, everyone laughed. The second time, it was the elder's favorite sitting fir who got scorched, and that turned into a 2-day sulking situation that you're still navigating. But by the third, even the bravest among you have started to recognize that this whole fire thing might come with a few complications. You'd assumed, once the fire was tamed enough to sit near, that the danger had passed. But now you're beginning to understand a hard truth. The fire doesn't care that you're in charge of it now. It doesn't know the rules. It's just hot, hungry, and very, very fast. The flame you brought back, the one you nursed like a frail bird, is thriving now. More than thriving. It's become something of a centerpiece in your camp. Everyone comes to warm their hands, to hover close in the evening when the chill creeps in, to roast bits of meat on the end of sticks, in what might generously be called experimentation. There's a kind of quiet reverence about it, even among those who still mutter about spirits and sky curses. At first, you were the only one brave or foolish enough to feed it. Now, others are watching, mimicking. Some are even taking small embers to their own shelters, trying to replicate the miracle. But here's the problem. No one really knows what they're doing. Someone leans in too far, trying to turn a strip of dried fish, and the sleeve of their hide tunic catches a stray spark. They're fine, eventually, but not before running 3 full circles around the clearing, flailing like a bird with one wing on fire, and rolling into the communal food pile. Another time, a child decides to throw a clump of grass into the flames, just to see what happens, and ends up setting his own hair alight. You've never seen a person go bald that quickly. He now wears a squirrel pelt as a kind of hat, and no one's allowed to joke about it unless they want a sharp rock to the ribs. It becomes clear that burns are now part of life. There's no word for burn in your language yet, just a lot of grunting and grimacing and pointing at raw, blistered skin. The first instinct is to rub dirt on it, which works exactly as well as you'd expect. Then someone tries pressing cool river stones to a particularly angry wound, and it helps at least more than dirt. That becomes the new strategy. Smooth, cold stones placed gently on singed arms and hands, passed around like sacred objects. A few people claim the pain fades faster if you chant to the river spirit while applying them. No one questions it. Why take chances? The real turning point comes when one of the hunters, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and usually very good at not being clumsy, trips while carrying a bundle of dried grass meant for feeding the fire. He lands right on the edge of the pit. There's a collective gasp, a scramble, and then a long silence broken only by the sound of sizzling. When he's pulled free, he's breathing, but his entire side is covered in angry red welts. He moans for days, sleeps very little, can't eat without wincing. It's the worst anyone has seen. That night, you all gather quietly around the fire, not quite sure whether to be grateful or furious. The flame crackles softly, oblivious. The air smells like singed fur and regret. No one touches it. No one dares feed it. For once, it is not your companion or your comfort. It is something else again. A warning. A reminder. Still, the idea of abandoning it never really enters your minds. Too many good things have come from it. Warmth, cooked meat, light during long nights, and the odd but growing sense of control over your world. Even the injuries seem worth it somehow, like scars from a hard-won lesson, and so you adapt. You designate one person to manage the fire each day, someone careful, someone with fast hands and a low chance of tripping over their own feet. The firekeeper gets special attention, extra food, a warm place to sleep, and occasionally, admiration from others who are still a little too nervous to sit close. It's not exactly a title of glory, but it's a start. And more importantly, it keeps the number of new burns manageable. Soon, there's a part of the camp that becomes known as the sitting circle, where those recovering from fire mishaps lie around grumbling and comparing their blisters like battle trophies. Someone jokes that it's a rite of passage. You wince as you watch a woman carefully wrap a band of wet bark around her hand, her face tight with pain. It does feel like a rite, in a strange way, a trial, one that none of you can avoid if you want to live beside the flame. Despite everything, the fascination doesn't fade. If anything, it deepens. You notice more people watching the fire closely now, not just for warmth or food, but for its patterns, the way it eats, the way it breathes. Someone notices that damp wood hisses differently from dry. Another points out that bark from certain trees makes the flame brighter. You all start collecting different materials, leaves, moss, sticks, animal dung, testing to see what makes it grow or what makes it smoke less. You're not just surviving anymore, you're studying. But always, in the background, there's the quiet presence of injury. A reminder in the form of healing wounds, burnt tools, and the occasional singed squirrel darting away in panic. Fire gives. Fire takes. And you begin to understand that part of its power lies in that very duality. It's not a pet. It's not a servant. It's a thing you live with, like a spirit that needs respect, or else it'll bite. There's talk of building something, an actual place to house the fire, so it doesn't roam across the camp like an unruly goat. A ring of stones, maybe, or a pit lined with thick mud. You test out small arrangements, learning that too much wind kills the flame and too little starves it. Smoke is still a problem. One wrong twist of the breeze and the whole cave fills with it, forcing everyone to evacuate like ants, fleeing a stung. But progress is progress, even if it makes you cough. By the end of the moon cycle, the fire is still here, still burning, still changing the way you live. And with it, you've started creating something unexpected, the beginnings of care. People look after each other more now. They check wounds. They argue about the best way to soothe burned skin. They gather the smoothest stones and the cleanest water. They invent techniques. Don't grab too tight. Don't pick at the blisters. Don't scream near the fire, or it might get excited. It's not medicine yet, but it's something. And you, the one who brought the flame back in the first place, watch this evolution with cautious pride. The fire has claimed a few eyebrows, sure, a few tunics, half a squirrel, if we're being honest, but it's also carved out something bigger. It's teaching you, not just about heat and fuel and smoke, but about care, about danger, about being human in the face of something wild. Because whether you call it progress, pain, or just plain bad luck, you've accidentally invented the first burn ward. The responsibility for tending the fire tonight is yours, passed on not through honor or praise, but through quiet consensus and averted eyes. The previous keeper still lies wrapped in furs near the back of the cave, her arm wrapped in damp bark and bruised from where the flames punished her enthusiasm. Her accident, involving a bundle of 2 green pine branches and an overly confident toss into the fire, had reminded everyone how quickly warmth could become pain. Now, as dusk gathers at the edge of the trees and the final scraps of roasted root are passed around the circle, the others begin retreating into their usual sleep spots. They murmur soft goodnights without naming you, careful not to make eye contact. That's the unspoken custom now. Whoever gets fire duty is treated like a ghost before the shift even starts. You sit beside the hearth, your back to a large stone, with the fire just in front of you. A shallow pit lines the center, ringed with hand-placed rocks, each one carefully chosen to prevent the flames from wandering across the camp again. The basket of fuel sits close by, twigs and bark you collected that afternoon, along with some brittle moss that crumbles between your fingers. The air has already turned colder. Night is falling hard, and the fire's glow grows brighter by contrast, casting warm gold onto the cave walls, while the world beyond slips into deep blue shadow. The first hour passes in relative peace. You add bark slowly, watching how the flames curl and rise, stretching their thin arms into the dark like dancers in slow motion. It has become almost meditative, the way the fire consumes its offerings. There is rhythm in the way it breathes, the way it hisses when the bark is wet, or purrs when the moss catches just right. With each flicker and crackle, you begin to feel not quite in control, but at least understood. The fire doesn't love you, but it knows you're there. As the camp settles into stillness, the noises change. The hum of voices and the occasional cough or grunt fade, replaced by the whisper of wind brushing over the hill, the distant creak of trees bending in the dark, and the occasional sigh or snore from a sleeping companion. With each passing moment, the fire becomes both comfort and burden, the only movement in a world gone still. You lean forward now and then to adjust a log or feed it a sliver of wood, each action deliberate, rehearsed, and filled with quiet urgency. There is no such thing as carelessness during the night shift. The weight of sleep begins to pull at your shoulders. It starts subtly, with a longer blink here, a heavier breath there. You shift your position, trying to stay alert, but the fire's warmth lulls rather than warns. It radiates a heat that seeps into your muscles and tempts you with softness. Still, you keep your spine straight, your eyes half-lidded but never fully closed. You reach into the fuel basket and feed the flames again, offering a small handful of dry moss to keep the light steady. The fire responds with a flare of orange and a low, contented hiss, like it approves of your offering. Then the wind picks up. It begins as a soft breeze that dances across your face, but it grows, pressing against the cave's edge with a slow, persistent push. The flames bend under the pressure, leaning to one side and licking close to the stone walls. You lean forward quickly, shielding the fire with your arms, rearranging the sticks so that the heart of the flame remains stable. Sparks rise and swirl in the air, tiny lights suspended in the dark before vanishing into the cold night. For a moment, you wonder how far those sparks could travel if the wind had its way, and how quickly the camp could become a memory if the fire escaped. After the gust passes, silence returns. But the adrenaline stays. Your pulse still beats hard in your neck, and you begin pacing softly around the fire's perimeter. You crouch to adjust stones, reposition twigs, and check for any embers that might have fallen outside the ring. Your every movement is cautious, quiet, and filled with focus. In this moment, you feel like a boundary keeper, standing between the known and the unknown. Inside the fire's glow is life and warmth. Just beyond it is the forest's shadowed mouth, filled with eyes and silence and the things you pretend not to believe in. Your thoughts drift to the others, sleeping under hides or curled in each other's warmth. Some lie near the fire, one arm flung across their faces, feet twitching in dreams. A child has kicked free of his covering and lies with his toes nearly in the ash. You gently pull the fur back over him and place a small log onto the fire, trying not to wake him. He stirs once, then settles, his breathing falling back into rhythm. You return to your place by the hearth, letting your hands hover above the flames just long enough to feel the edge of the heat before pulling back. As the stars shift in their slow arc above, you begin to count the time by the way the fire changes. You know now how long a moss bundle lasts. You can tell when bark is too damp to catch. You've learned which sticks crack loud enough to make you flinch, and which ones burn down to white ash without a sound. These lessons aren't written or spoken, but they root themselves in your hands, in your eyes, in the muscles of your back and legs. There is no sleep, but there is knowledge, and something about that steadies you. Sometime in the final stretch of night, you feel it. A moment of calm so deep, it silences even your nerves. The fire burns clean and steady. The air holds its breath, and not a single leaf stirs outside the cave. You sit beside the flame with your knees pulled to your chest, eyes fixed on the glowing bed of coals. The red and gold shimmer beneath the surface like buried suns, and you imagine you could reach in and pull out one of those embers. Hold it in your palm like a tiny heartbeat. Morning begins with a shift in the sky's color. The black gives way to a soft, bruised gray, and to hints of dusty rose along the treetops. The others stir slowly, blinking at the light, stretching limbs stiff from stone and fur. No one speaks right away. They glance at the fire first, checking to see if it still lives. When they see the flames licking softly at the remains of the night's fuel, they nod or grunt in quiet approval. You don't say much either. You stretch your back, place the last bit of dry bark into the coals, and rise to your feet. The warmth lingers on your skin, even as the morning chill returns. You survived the night without sleep. You kept the fire burning, and for another day, at least that's enough. It begins with rain. Not a dramatic storm, not the kind that cracks the sky open or rattles the bones of the trees. Just a slow, quiet drizzle that settles in before dawn and lingers like a sour mood. You don't notice it at first. You're still asleep, curled up in the same spot where you'd kept watch the night before, trusting someone else to tend the flames this time. But when you blink open your eyes and see the thin silver mist hanging low over the camp, your gut tightens before you've even turned your head toward the fire pit. The hearth is dark, not just low, not just fading, dead. Cold stones, pale ash, no glowing heart hidden beneath. Someone pokes it with a stick, hopeful, but the stick stirs only dust. A few others gather around, huddled in damp furs, staring at the spot like mourners around a grave. No one says anything right away, but the feeling is thick in the air. Something has been lost. There had been signs. The night before had been windy. The firekeeper, a younger boy, too eager to prove himself and too proud to ask for help, had struggled with the embers, feeding them bark too wet and logs too thick. Someone had offered advice, but he'd brushed it off, insisting he had it under control. By midnight, the flames were already low. By morning, they were memory. A few tried to revive it. They kneel in the pit, blowing into the ash, scraping back layers in search of a coal still holding on. They feed it moss, curls of dry bark from beneath their cloaks. Nothing catches. Nothing even smokes. Eventually, one of the elders gives a quiet shake of her head. It's gone. Panic doesn't come all at once. It creeps in sideways. Someone mutters that it'll be harder to cook today. Someone else notes that the cold is already settling into their fingers. The child who lost his fur blanket whimpers and buries himself in his mother's lap. The camp begins to shift into problem-solving mode, but with none of the usual confidence. The last time the fire died, it had taken a near disaster to bring it back. A journey, a chance, a spark in the woods. No one here really knows how to make fire from nothing. Not yet. You're sent to scout the old burned site again. Maybe there are coals left under the fallen tree, something waiting to be coaxed back to life. You go, quietly, with two others. The forest is soaked. Every step drips. The ground squishes underfoot. The tree itself is half collapsed now, its trunk soggy and black with mold. You dig in the soft earth beneath it, fingers numb, lungs tight, but there's nothing. No heat, no hope. You return to camp soaked, empty-handed, and silent. By midday, there's talk of borrowing fire from another group. A few know of a neighboring clan that camps near the river bend, 3 hills east. They've been seen with smoke rising from their caves. It's not far, but it's not friendly ground either. Not enemies, exactly. Just strangers with sharp spears and less patience for visitors. No one wants to go, but the cold is seeping in. The food is raw and hard to chew. Spirits are fraying. Pride doesn't keep you warm. Eventually, someone volunteers. Then another. You're not sure if they're brave or just tired. Either way, the rest of you gather around the empty hearth as they leave, watching them vanish into the mist with nothing but a flint blade, a carved bowl of dried moss, and hope so fragile it feels like ash on the tongue. The fire comes back, but not honestly. It arrives at twilight, hidden beneath a clay bowl lined with bark and moss, flickering low and angry. The 2 who fetched it return scratched, limping and silent, but they carry the flame like it's treasure, like it's a newborn, like it cost something they don't want to talk about. The bowl is set carefully in the hearth pit, and new fuel is offered like tribute, small, dry twigs, curls of animal fur, scraps of last season's bark. It catches quickly. The flame rises. The camp breathes again. But it isn't your fire. Not really. They stole it. From the group at the river bend, the ones who hadn't said yes, but hadn't exactly said no either. Your fire seekers had waited until nightfall, crept close to their cave, and found a small unattended ember nest tucked beneath a stone outcrop. There had been whispering, a shared glance, a decision made without ceremony. One of them scooped the ember with practiced speed, while the other kept watch. They were nearly gone when the shouting started. Apparently, it hadn't been unattended after all. The ones from the river clan followed, but not very far. There were no weapons raised, no blood drawn, just voices. Angry, loud, sharp enough to cut. The kind of words that don't need translation. The kind that mean, that was ours. What followed wasn't a fight. Not exactly. But it wasn't peace either. A standoff in the twilight. 2 groups circling like wolves, each daring the other to take the first wrong step. Your people didn't apologize, and they didn't run. But when they turned back toward the trees, with the fire cupped between them, they didn't look over their shoulders either. Now, as the flame dances again in the heart of your camp, there's a new feeling in the air, thicker than smoke, heavier than warmth, ownership, territory. The quiet understanding that fire is no longer just survival. It's a symbol, a prize, a thing people will take or defend. The others are watching it more closely now, and each other too. You see it in the way they shift their sleeping spots nearer to the flame, in the way they hold their tools when someone reaches too far into the hearth to stir the coals. The fire is yours again, but the question now is, for how long? And so the fire changes you again, not just in how you cook or warm your hands, but in how you think. You start to wonder what else it can do, what other rules it might follow, what secrets are buried in its glow, waiting to be read like stories in the smoke. You don't call it a triangle, of course. You don't call it anything. But slowly, through long nights and frustrating mornings, through failed attempts and accidental successes, the rules of fire begin to whisper themselves into your hands. It happens gradually, so subtly you don't realize it's happening until someone does something wrong and the flame vanishes. Again, and someone else does it slightly differently, and suddenly the fire roars back to life like it had only been pretending to sleep. You begin to see the pattern, even if you don't have names for the pieces. It starts with the realization that dry things catch better. You learn this the hard way, after trying to feed the hearth with bark soaked from morning mist. The result is smoke, a lot of smoke, and a sullen fire that sulks and spits until someone throws on a piece of sun-dried grass instead. That one ignites instantly, snapping with satisfaction, and the fire seems to sigh with relief. You repeat the experiment with different kinds of fuel, wet moss, dry twigs, green leaves, old dung. The results are consistent. Damp materials make it choke. Dry ones make it dance. You don't explain it. You just begin to reach for the dry stuff first. Every time. So, fuel, but only the right kind. The second piece comes to you one night when the wind dies. You're crouched by the fire, trying to coax it higher to keep the chill at bay, feeding it generous handfuls of shredded bark. But it barely responds. The flame dwindles, flickers, curls inward. You shift your body, trying to shield it, and it weakens further. Out of desperation, you lean down and blow gently across the coals. Just a soft breath, and the fire flares to life. A single moment of air, and the embers bloom. Your heart stutters. You try it again. Another breath, and the fire crackles. The others gather around quickly, watching. Someone tries it themselves, breathing a little too hard and sending sparks into their own face. But the point stands. Fire needs air. Somehow, it eats it. Later, when the rains come and water clings to everything, you notice again how the fire fails. No matter how much bark you pile on, if there's no space for the air to slip through, it dies. Someone builds a fuel nest that's too tight, packed too thick, and the fire smothers itself without even a protest. The embers drown in their own smoke. But when the same pile is broken apart and rebuilt with careful gaps between sticks, just enough space for breath to move, the fire returns. Not angrily, but steadily, as if glad to have been understood. The third piece is trickier. It hides itself in moments of frustration and failed attempts. On a particularly wet day, someone builds a beautiful hearth, stones arranged just right, moss packed beneath, arc ready, but nothing catches. They try again and again. Smoke comes, then fades. Not enough heat, someone grumbles. Not enough spark. Another throws a handful of dried grass into the pit, lights it from a coal, and layers the sticks around it like bones in a ribcage. This time it catches, fast and strong. You notice the difference. The first pile had been too spread out, too cold. The second was compact, tight, but not smothering. The flame had something to grip. So, fuel, air, heat. That's the shape of it. A silent truth revealed through trial, failure, and observation. You don't carve it into stone or tell stories about it. At least not yet, but it starts to live in your hands. You know that too much moss suffocates the flame, and that sticks too far apart won't hold it. You know the fire dies if no one tends it, but flares if you blow just right. You know how to stack, how to space, how to feed. These aren't accidents anymore. They're choices. Not everyone notices. Some still see the fire as a living spirit, one that rises or fades according to moods in moonlight. Others swear it listens to their singing, or that it brightens when a certain stone is tossed into the coals. You don't mock them. Sometimes you sing too, but in your heart, you know the fire is not listening to your voice. It's responding to conditions, to patterns, to rules. You begin experimenting. Not openly, not with ceremony, but in quiet moments. You rearrange the fuel piles. You build smaller fires in hidden places, trying different shapes, different materials. You discover that a cone burns faster, but a flat spread lasts longer. You learn that fungus logs smolder slowly, and that thin twigs scream when they catch too fast. Each discovery is stored away in your muscles, not your mouth. You don't talk about it, but you know. Someone eventually notices. They watch you tending the fire, reshaping the coals, adjusting the breadth of space around the fuel. They see how easily the flame answers you. They call you lucky. You say nothing, but deep down, you know it isn't luck. You've begun to understand the pattern, the invisible triangle that keeps the flame alive. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You've watched the fire die in silence. You've watched it leap, catch your breath. You've seen how too much, or too little, of any one thing can collapse the whole fragile miracle. It isn't magic. It's something better. It's knowledge. Not taught, not written, learned in fingertips, burned into memory. And you share it in small ways. When someone struggles with the hearth, you offer just enough advice to steer them without taking over. You hand them the driest bundle. You gesture toward the coal and wait to see if they remember the breath. When they succeed, even clumsily, even after several tries, you feel it inside you, a quiet sense of continuity. The fire isn't yours alone anymore. It belongs to those who are learning, the way you once did, by fumbling forward in the dark and finding warmth anyway. The first time someone drags a mammoth haunch too close to the fire, it isn't a moment of genius. It's clumsiness, mostly. The hunter is tired, the meat is heavy, and no one has figured out the ideal distance between flesh and flame. So it flops too close, slapping against the edge of the glowing hearth with a dull thump. No one says anything at first. They just stare at the chunk of meat now hissing over the coals, the fat beginning to bubble where it touches the heat. Someone chuckles nervously. Someone else looks horrified, but no one moves to stop it. Then it begins to smell, not the usual scent of blood and raw sinew. This is something different. The fat crackles and spits into the fire, sending up a hiss and a ribbon of smoke that smells good, rich and savory and unfamiliar, like something meant to be eaten on purpose. It curls through the air, slipping into noses and turning heads. Bellies growl. A child absent-mindedly licks his fingers, even though they're still covered in dirt. Someone inches forward, staring at the surface of the meat, where the outer layer is beginning to change color. No longer raw red, but darkening, caramelizing. The hunter shrugs and flips the haunch with a stick, revealing a side that looks browned rather than blackened. You lean closer, not quite believing what you're seeing. The meat glistens slightly. The edges are crusted, but soft. It doesn't resemble anything you've eaten before. It looks better. It looks finished. Whatever that means. You all wait, watching it like it might speak. Eventually, someone cuts a strip from the edge and takes a bite. They chew slowly, very slowly. Then, without a word, they take another. That's all the confirmation the rest of you need. A feeding frenzy follows, less chaotic than a hunt, but more intense than a normal meal. Everyone wants a taste. Everyone burns their fingers trying to pull pieces from the hot surface. One person singes their tongue and hisses, but refuses to stop eating. Another insists on waiting for the center of the haunch, claiming it'll be even better once the heat travels through. No one argues. You're too busy chewing. The texture is strange but pleasant, softer than raw meat, easier to tear. The flavor is richer, deeper. There's a warmth to it, not just in temperature but in experience. It fills your mouth, coats your tongue, lingers behind your teeth. It feels like nourishment at another level, like food elevated into something more. You look around and see the same realization dawning on everyone's face. You've stumbled onto something important. After that, cooking isn't an accident anymore. You begin experimenting. Tentatively at first, small strips of meat dangled over the fire, speared on sharpened sticks, or laid carefully on flat rocks, heated at the edges of the coals. You try fish, tubers, bone marrow. You discover that the marrow, when heated just right, turns into a warm, fatty paste that makes dry meat taste better and keeps the cold from creeping so deep into your bones. Someone starts placing mushrooms near the edge of the fire, and though a few end up ruined, shriveling into black crumbs, others take on a smoky flavor that has people fighting over them. Once, someone drops a lizard directly onto the coals and laughs as it pops and crackles, then slices it open to find the meat flaky and fragrant. Even insects, roasted until they puff, find new appreciation, especially among the younger ones, who are more curious than squeamish. Some items surprise you. Eggs discovered nestled in the hollow of a tree are placed too close to the flame and explode with a soft pop, coating the firekeeper's hands in scalding goo. That lesson only has to be learned once. But soon, you discover that if you crack the egg and pour it into a carved piece of bark, letting it sit near the edge of the coals, it thickens into something soft and warm and oddly satisfying. You don't have a word for custard, but you've made it. Every successful experiment is met with nods, grunts, and the occasional low sound of satisfaction. Every failure becomes a new piece of clan wisdom. Don't roast snake skins, they stink. Don't cook clams in the shell unless you want them to scream and burst. Don't let fatty meat drip directly into the coals unless you want the entire hearth engulfed in a panic-inducing fireball. It becomes a kind of culture, shared lessons wrapped in laughter and burned fingers. Your tools change too. You begin shaping stones into flatter cooking surfaces, weaving simple wooden racks, learning how to balance spears over the flame without dropping half your meal into the ash. Cooking becomes more than a task. It becomes a skill. Even the act of eating begins to shift. Instead of sitting apart, tearing raw meat in silence, people begin to gather around the fire during meals. They wait. They pass things around. They joke about whose stick is burning too fast or whose bark tray is leaking. The fire becomes a center, not just for warmth or light, but for stories, for companionship, for planning and unwinding. You sit together not because you must, but because it feels right. The fire changes the way you eat, but also the way you exist together. The benefits go beyond flavor. You notice your body feels stronger now, less sick. Cuts heal faster. Stomachs ache less often. The elders speak of how food over flame lasts longer before turning sour. You start to think of meat not as something that must be eaten immediately, but something that can wait. That can be cooked, dried, even smoked. It gives you time, flexibility, security. A little fire and a little patience means less waste, more safety, and fewer nights going hungry. There's also a quiet pride, a growing sense that you've done something your ancestors didn't. You've taken a wild, dangerous element and turned it into a tool, not just for surviving, but for enjoying, for improving. Fire is no longer just a way to stay alive through the night. It's a way to change the food, the moment, even the mood. A cook who knows how close to hold the meat, how long to leave the tuber, how to angle the stick, gains a certain status. You begin to recognize people by their firecraft, their ability to create warmth, not just of heat, but of connection. And so, by accident, by clumsiness, and eventually by intention, roasted mammoth becomes more than a meal. It becomes a revelation, not just of flavor, but of possibility. A lesson that heat changes things. That fire, dangerous though it is, can transform the world not only through destruction, but through patience and precision. Every scorched finger and successful bite is another step forward into a future that tastes better than the past. By now, fire is more than something you use. It's something you gather around. It draws the clan together like nothing else ever has. Even on days when tempers run short and food runs shorter, the fire pulls everyone inward once the sun starts to fall. It isn't just the heat or the cooked meat or the flickering light keeping predators at bay. It's something quieter, something harder to explain. The way people lean toward the flames at night says it all. There's comfort in the glow, in the sound of wood hissing as it burns, in the way smoke rises like thoughts that don't need to be spoken aloud. You notice the shift slowly. At first, the hearth was strictly practical. A place to cook, to warm your hands, to dry your feet after a rainstorm. But now people linger longer. Someone starts humming while tending the coals. Someone else hums back. A third joins in, tapping a stick softly against a stone. It's not music exactly, but it fills the silence in a way that feels right, natural, like the fire wants it there. Conversations that used to happen in motion, while gathering, while walking, while sharpening spears, begin happening in stillness, beside the fire. People talk more at night now. Not always about urgent things. Sometimes just stories, memories, descriptions of dreams or guesses about what lives beyond the ridge where the sky meets the hills. The elder with the burned tunic tells stories about her grandmother, who could whistle to birds. A child describes the shape of a shadow they once saw and swears it walked like a man. You laugh, not because you don't believe them, but because the idea makes the fire feel warmer. It isn't just that people talk more, they sit closer. You see it in the way their shoulders touch when the wind blows cold. In the way someone offers another a piece of bark to sit on so they won't get damp. In the way hands reach out with meat or fruit, or even just a glance. The fire softens something in all of you. Even the sharp-tongued hunter, who once tried to roast a fish still wearing its scales, has started sharing. He offered you the good part of the marrow last night, wordlessly. That means something. But with closeness comes change. You start to notice things you hadn't before. Who always sits on the left side of the fire? Who falls asleep before the stories end? Who wakes up coughing when the smoke shifts? The fire doesn't just bring people together. It makes you see them. It forces a kind of attention that wasn't necessary before. When the light only came from the sun, everyone scattered with it. Now you remain in place, under the same soft glow. And you learn things you didn't expect to learn. You also learn about smoke, mostly by breathing it. The fire is friendly until the wind changes. Then it becomes something else entirely. You try to shift your seat, but the smoke follows. You cough, your eyes water. You try to act like it doesn't bother you, because someone else is still talking and you don't want to interrupt. But your chest tightens. Someone else starts coughing too, and then it's acceptable to get up and move. You all shuffle around the hearth like dancers, trying to stay just outside the gray cloud's reach. Eventually, someone mutters, half joking, that the smoke is clever, that it always finds the person telling the longest story. The soot is another matter. It gets into everything: your hair, your furs, your fingers, the creases around your eyes. No one minds much. It becomes a kind of badge, a sign that you spent time by the fire, that you were part of the circle. The children smear it on their faces and pretend to be cave spirits. A few adults pretend not to be amused. Someone begins drawing symbols in it, marks on stone and bark, on tools and walls. The shapes don't mean anything yet, but they're repeated, remembered, responded to with other shapes. It's the beginning of something, even if no one realizes it. At some point, sitting by the fire becomes a kind of unspoken ritual. You know who tends it first, who brings the first log, who waits for others to gather before they begin to speak. These small, quiet patterns form without instruction. No one sets rules, but everyone follows them. And when someone breaks one, by interrupting a story, by tossing wet moss on the coals too soon, it feels wrong in a way that has nothing to do with heat or hunger. Sometimes the stories take on rhythm, a back and forth. One person speaks, another adds to it. You begin crafting tales, not just retelling events. A simple hunt becomes an epic. A strange sound in the woods becomes a creature. Someone invents a name for it, then someone else draws it in soot. Soon, you all speak of it like it was always part of the world. Fire gives space for imagination, for invention. It doesn't just warm your body. It stirs the foggy edges of your thoughts, shapes them into something that can be passed from one voice to another. The elders notice this most. Their stories become longer, fuller. They reference things said the night before. They build a thread, a memory shared not just by them, but now by you. Around the fire, the past becomes something that belongs to everyone, shaped not by what was, but by how it is remembered. And in that remembering, something new is built. Not just knowledge, but trust, shared time, shared warmth. Fire teaches you that survival isn't only about food or shelter. It's also about belonging, about recognizing the faces in the flickering light, the voices that drift through smoke, the hands that pass you warmth. It's in these moments that you begin to understand you haven't just discovered a new way to cook. You've discovered what it means to gather. The first time you try building a fire inside the cave, it feels like a brilliant idea. Outside, the wind howls through the valley with teeth, and the fire barely stays lit without someone sitting beside it, like a stubborn parent trying to coax a moody child to behave. Sparks blow everywhere. Ash coats the food. Your eyes sting and your hands shake. Someone mutters, not for the first time, that the gods could have made fire less dramatic. Someone else, more practical, suggests dragging it indoors. And that's how it starts. It takes 3 of you to move the coals from the hearth into the cave. A bed of moss, a wide bowl of packed dirt, and several very nervous hands make up the transfer team. There's a silent agreement not to breathe too hard. One wrong move and you'll be waking up without eyebrows again. But the flames hold. A careful stack of bark and dry twigs feeds the embers, and soon a proper fire flickers inside the shelter. The stone walls glow orange, and everyone stares like you've just lit the moon. At first, it feels like a miracle. The warmth hugs every surface. The chill disappears. Shadows dance higher across the cave ceiling than they ever have outside. The baby, still wrapped in mammoth fur, stops fussing. Even the crankiest elder, the one who's never impressed by anything unless it's fermented, lets out a soft hum of satisfaction. There's enough room for everyone to sit, to stretch, to eat without freezing. It feels like progress. Then the smoke begins to crawl up the walls. At first it's gentle, just a soft haze that adds mystery to the firelight. But soon it thickens. It starts hugging the ceiling like it's trying to escape, only to find there's nowhere to go. The children rub their eyes and complain. You cough, discreetly at first, then louder. Others follow. The air feels thicker. The baby starts crying again. You open your mouth to suggest moving the fire back outside, but your throat catches. Your voice comes out as more of a wheeze. That's when you realize the cave doesn't breathe. Outside, the wind carried the smoke away, scattered it across the trees, diluted it into sky. Inside, it swirls and clings, wrapping around hair, skin, and lungs. Someone stands and waves their arms near the entrance, trying to fan the smoke outward. It only makes it worse. The flame flutters, nearly dies, then surges again as if offended. A few people grab their cloaks and shuffle toward the mouth of the cave, coughing, rubbing their eyes, mumbling about curses. The elder hums louder, probably out of spite. No one wants to admit defeat. This is your new fire cave. You can't just walk out and pretend it didn't happen. So, instead of giving up, you get clever. Someone suggests digging a shallow pit beneath the fire, so it sits lower, hoping the smoke will rise slower. Another recommends poking small holes near the cave entrance, less for air, more to let smoke escape. You try both. The pit helps a little, until someone steps in it and burns their foot. The holes are trickier, and you quickly realize you have no tools delicate enough to carve the stone properly. One brave soul suggests cutting a vent through the ceiling. They get exactly as far as staring up at the massive rock overhead before shaking their head and sitting down. Eventually, you settle on compromise. The fire stays small, very small. You feed it slowly, only with bark that doesn't smoke much and sticks that are dry enough to catch without complaint. The firekeeper has a new job now, not just feeding the flames, but feeding them smart. One wrong log and the entire cave turns into a coughing contest. There's another problem no one talks about right away: the ceiling. Days pass. The fire burns carefully, consistently. And soon, the stone above begins to darken. Not all at once. Just a faint film at first, like shadow you can't brush away. But it grows. The soot climbs higher each night, creeping from the fire outward like black vines. Your clean, pale ceiling, if it ever was clean, is now a dome of ash. You tell yourself it's fine. It's just color, just a sign that the fire lives here now. But when the soot starts falling in flakes onto sleeping faces, people begin glancing up more often. And not fondly. Still, the warmth is worth it. You wake up with fewer aches. Food cooks faster. Conversations last longer into the night, now that you don't have to chase warmth across the wind. And the fire has taken on a new kind of importance, not just as a tool or a comfort, but as a permanent resident. It belongs here. It anchors the space. The cave feels lived in now. A place with rules, with zones. Sleeping spots line the back wall. The fire sits at the center. Tools have their place. Bones are stacked. You're not just surviving anymore. You're settling. Someone suggests marking the ceiling deliberately, not to hide the soot, but to use it. They dip fingers in the dark residue and begin to draw. Spirals, lines, shapes of animals. You've hunted. Eyes, tracks, fire. No one speaks while they do it. No one needs to. The marks make the smoke feel less accidental, less like damage, more like history. The cave won't ever be truly fireproof. You've accepted that. There will always be coughing. The air will always hang heavy in the morning. There will always be ash in your hair. But with enough attention, enough wisdom passed from one singed firekeeper to the next, the fire becomes something you can live with, something that can live with you. And if a little soot finds its way into your food every now and then, well, that's the taste of progress. It begins with a whisper, not a loud argument, not a brawl, just a whisper that travels from one end of the camp to the other. Their fire burns longer. That's all it takes. One quiet comment made while watching smoke rise from the neighboring camp down the hill, where their flames flicker higher, steadier, casting long shadows on the rocks around them. You hadn't noticed before, but now that it's been said, you can't stop looking. Their smoke is richer, more constant. They gather around it with relaxed shoulders, laughing louder than usual. One of them even roasts 2 fish at once. The luxury of it stings in a way no cold wind ever did. You try not to let it bother you, but it does. Your own fire, for all your effort, is temperamental. It requires coaxing every morning and vigilance every night. It hisses at the wrong kind of wood. It sulks if the wind is strong. And lately, it's begun to shrink by mid-evening, even with plenty of fuel. A few others had noticed too. You catch glances at the hearth, at the fuel pile, then back toward the path, where the other camp's light pulses in the distance, like a heartbeat that never stutters. Jealousy, it turns out, burns hotter than any coal. It starts small. Someone suggests moving your fire further into the cave, deeper where the wind can't reach. Someone else recommends stacking the wood higher to keep the flame alive longer. You all nod and pretend it's just about efficiency, but in the back of your mind is the knowledge that your fire must not only warm you, it must outlast theirs. No one says it aloud. That would sound foolish, petty, but the need simmers just below the surface, as steady as the fire itself. Then one night, your fire goes out early. You'd tended it carefully, just like always, but the new logs were damp, the bark too green. The flame sputtered and curled into itself until only embers remained. You knelt there in silence, trying to blow life back into it, but the coals were already cold. Outside, the neighboring fire still crackled. Its glow reached the trees. You could smell their roasted meat on the wind, richer and smokier than your own attempts ever managed. That night, everyone went to sleep a little earlier. No one said much. Someone muttered, maybe they have a better firekeeper. That was all, but it was enough. The next day, changes begin. You start rising earlier to gather the driest wood before anyone else. You carve flatter hearth stones. You start keeping your best kindling hidden under a woven mat. Just in case someone gets careless, you stay up longer. You watch the other camp when you think no one is looking. And you aren't the only one. Others do the same, checking, comparing, adjusting their own hearths to match what they glimpse from afar. What used to be quiet maintenance becomes performance. Each act of tending the fire carries the silent weight of comparison. Before long, fuel becomes a point of competition. You find yourself walking farther into the forest, returning with arms full of bark and branches stripped clean. When someone else brings back a bundle of sweet-smelling wood that burns without smoke, everyone notices. Questions are asked. Where did you find that? What tree? What direction? But the answers are vague, guarded. The warmth has become something to protect. Then someone steals wood. It isn't proven, but it's obvious. A pile that was there at dusk is gone by morning, and no one in your group claims to have touched it. Accusations float on the smoke. Someone narrows their eyes toward the distant glow of the other camp. Someone else sharpens a stick with more force than necessary. You all try to act normal, but there's a tension now, like flint pressed too close to stone. There's no direct confrontation, but every interaction feels loaded, heavy with implication. The silence between camps grows wider than the space between trees. Soon after, one of your elders declares that the hearth must be rebuilt. Wider, deeper, with better air channels and flatter stones. They assign the task to the younger ones, ostensibly to teach them, but really to show the others how seriously you're taking things. When it's done, a new fire burns better, stronger. For a few nights, you sleep with a satisfied chest, knowing your glow is just as tall, just as steady as theirs. And they build a second hearth, not for need, just for show. Two fires, side by side. Their people sit between them like royalty, basking in the even warmth, passing food from one flame to the other. Someone laughs a little too loud. Someone else pretends not to see. But your group goes quiet that night. You eat quickly. The shadows feel longer. The fire feels smaller, even if it isn't. The elders say nothing. But the next day, 3 new hearths are marked with stones, spaced out around the camp. They don't all get used, but they exist. As a statement, as a warning. You build them with care, stacking the fuel high, drying wood near the flames, guarding every spark like it could betray you. The children are told not to wander near the other camp anymore, not to look at their fire, not to talk about how nice the smell is when their smoke drifts your way. A few nights later, one of your scouts returns with a quiet report. The other group has started polishing their stones. Their hearths are ringed with white pebbles now, decorative ones, selected for color and shape. You say nothing, but you feel the heat rise behind your eyes. That night, someone in your group arranges charred bones in a circle around your central hearth. Another tosses a bundle of herbs into the coals, not for flavor, but for scent. The smoke curls upward in rich, spicy coils. Even the wind seems impressed. And this is how the warmth wars begin. Not with flames, but with glances. Not with battles, but with pride. The fire has given you more than heat. It's given you comparison. A way to measure who has more, who knows more, who burns brighter. The fire has taught you to observe, to adapt, to improve, but also to judge, to rank, to envy. No one wants to fight. Not yet. But every night, when you sit beside your carefully built hearth and watch your neighbor's smoke rise into the stars, the embers in your chest feel as alive as the ones beneath your feet. You sharpen your sticks a little longer. You gather your wood a little farther from camp. You keep one eye on your own fire and one on theirs. Warmth, once shared, is now measured. And the flames remember everything. The first time you show a child how to feed the fire, you realize just how much you've learned without ever putting it into words. You crouch beside them at the hearth, the cave air thick with morning chill, and watch their small fingers tremble as they reach for a bundle of dry moss. It crumbles in their hands, and they look at you with a mix of embarrassment and hope, waiting to be corrected. But you don't correct them, not harshly. You show them. You hold their hand a little steadier, guide it toward the coals, and together you blow. Just enough. Not too hard, not too soft. The ember flares, the moss catches, and their face lights up brighter than the flame itself. That's how it begins. Not with grand ceremonies or carved stones passed from one hand to the next, but with small gestures. A nod, a shared breath, the quiet patience of someone who remembers the first time they failed and someone else was kind enough not to laugh. You teach not through lessons, but through rhythm, through ritual, through letting them try and burn their fingers and try again. As more children grow, they begin to watch with greater attention. They notice which bark burns longer, which twigs snap louder, which leaves are better left out of the fuel pile, unless you want the whole cave choking on bitterness. They remember the stories you tell, not just about how to keep the fire alive, but why it matters. About the time the fire went out and had to be stolen back. About the warmth wars and the pride that nearly made everyone freeze. About the first piece of roasted mammoth and how it changed what food could be. These stories aren't carved into walls. They're carried in voices, in soot-covered hands, in burned fingernails and long nights spent squatting beside coals while the others sleep. The young ones listen as they watch you arrange the kindling, learning the shape of the hearth, not just as a physical place, but as something sacred, something alive. You see them mimicking your movements, practicing your calm when the fire doesn't catch, imitating the way you breathe into the embers, just so. There's pride in watching them learn, but there's also fear, because you remember how fragile fire is, how quickly it can die if no one tends it. You remember nights when the fuel ran out, when damp wind crawled through the cracks in the cave, when your hands shook from cold and your breath rattled in your chest. You know that knowledge not shared is knowledge lost. So you keep teaching, quietly, constantly, without ever calling it teaching. Some children take to it naturally. Others struggle. One girl nearly burns off her eyebrows twice before she learns to lean back when feeding moss to the coals. Another insists that singing to the fire makes it catch faster. And while you're not convinced, her fires rarely fail, so no one stops her. A boy with quick fingers starts carving fire symbols into bark, marking the fuel bundles he thinks are best. You don't understand what the markings mean at first, but he remembers. He always remembers. In time, they begin to teach each other. You hear them explaining things in their own words, passing on the tricks you showed them with new phrasing, new metaphors. The fire becomes part of their language, part of their games, even part of their disputes. One child accuses another of hoarding the dry twigs. A third volunteers to mediate by offering up her own moss. It's all part of it now. Fire is no longer something only the elders tend. It belongs to everyone, especially the young. The hearth changes too, not its shape, but its meaning. It becomes the place where stories are repeated, questions are asked, memories are passed from one circle of faces to the next. The old ones sit back more often now, letting their hands rest while younger ones feed the flame. There are moments when you step outside and see the glow from a distance, see the children tending it, hear their laughter echo against the cave walls, and you realize that the fire is no longer yours to protect. It protects itself now, through them. You remember when it was a mystery, when no one knew how to coax it, how to carry it, how to keep it from dying in the night. You remember the first time it was stolen, the first time it vanished, the first time it turned on someone and burned not just their flesh, but their pride. And now, all of that is memory, bundled into the simple act of handing a child a stick and saying, "Try." The spark no longer lives in one pair of hands. It passes like breath, like song, from one voice to another, from one heartbeat to the next. And knowledge is scattered now, but that's what makes it strong. It no longer needs to be hoarded. It no longer belongs to a single cave or name. It travels with them, with you, with the smoke curling into the night sky. And as the firelight reflects in the wide eyes of the next generation, you understand something that once would have sounded like magic. You don't just pass on warmth. You pass on memory, identity, possibility. The flame isn't just fire anymore. It's continuity. Far beneath your feet, the ground holds the bones of those who never knew flame. Above you, the stars blinked quietly as if remembering. And just ahead, tucked deeper into the land, lie the shadows of places where this fire will burn long after your hands have stilled. In one such place, nestled inside the rocky jaws of the earth, the walls hold layers of ash older than stories, older than speech. A cave waits there, still remembering the breath of 1,000 flames. That's where we're headed next. You step out of the sun and into a silence older than anything you've ever known. The entrance to the cave is not grand or gaping. It doesn't roar or reach skyward like the mouth of a god. It simply waits, low, narrow, unassuming, tucked into the side of a hill that most would pass without notice. But once inside, your eyes adjust slowly, and you begin to see the layers. Not just of stone and ash, but of time itself. The air is still, but it's not empty. It carries something with it. A weight, a memory, a kind of hush that even your footsteps refuse to disturb. You've been in caves before. Most people have. They're good for shelter, for drying meat, for avoiding rain that won't let up. But this one feels different. It doesn't just offer protection. It feels lived in, like it once held more than people, like it held purpose. The walls near the entrance are marked with smoke, thin black trails that run along the stone like the veins of old trees. The floor is uneven, but smooth in places where countless feet must have passed. You duck under a low outcrop and continue inward, feeling the temperature shift, cooler, but not cold. The deeper you go, the more the dark seems to wrap around your body, until the entrance behind you is no more than a faint sliver of light. The silence sharpens. The smell of ash becomes stronger. And then you see it. The hearth. It's not burning, of course, not anymore. But the shape remains, an oval ring of darkened stone, sunken into the floor, surrounded by flecks of charcoal and fragments of bone. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't glow or whisper secrets. But it's unmistakably a fire site. A place where flame once lived, not for a moment, but for years, maybe generations. You kneel beside it, fingers brushing the fine powder of the ash, and you understand in your bones that you're not the first to do this. Someone else, many someone else's, knelt here, fed this fire, watched it die, and rise again. You sit quietly for a while, letting the dark settle around you. There's no sound, not even dripping water, just the soft echo of your breath. You imagine what it would have felt like back then, before stories had shape, before memory had words. A group gathered in the same space you occupy now, pressed close around the flames, their faces flickering with light, smoke clinging to the ceiling, sparks rising like brief stars. You can almost hear them breathing. When you look more closely, you start to notice details that only time could have made. The walls aren't blank. There are smudges, blackened spots, where hands once rested, or where smoke had gathered in thick trails. In places, the soot is layered so deeply that it peels away like bark. Beneath the soot, the stone shines slightly, polished not by tools, but by repetition. Touch after touch, step after step, year after year. You move deeper into the cave and come across another pit, smaller, shallower, but clearly used. Then another, a third. Some show signs of stone linings. Others seem hastily arranged. One is blackened on only one side, as if fire had clung unevenly, pushed by wind, or shaped by habit. They're not decorative. They're practical. But together, they form a map of something greater than survival. These weren't just scattered attempts to stay warm. They were practiced, repeated, intentional. It's not just the hearths that tell the story. Bits of bone lie scattered around them, not in piles, but in gentle arcs and loops. Some are cracked cleanly, likely split for marrow. Others are scorched. You pick one up, carefully, and see the darkened edge where flame once touched it. The fire didn't just feed the people here. It fed on the same things they did. It became part of the cycle, part of the life they made in this cave. You find tools too, not many, and none pristine. Just flakes of stone, broken tips of blades, the smooth underside of something that may have once been a scraper. One has soot pressed into a shallow groove, perhaps dropped too close to the hearth, or used to stir something cooking on a flat stone. You run your thumb along its side and imagine someone doing the same, shaping it in the firelight, setting it down beside them when they leaned back to rest. There's something humbling about the space. It's not grand. It's not ceremonial. It's not trying to impress you. It simply is. A place where life happened, where flame was kept alive long enough to leave a scar on the stone, where people returned again and again to make warmth in a world that offered so little of it. You feel no ghosts, only presence, as if the memory of fire here is so strong that even in its absence, it casts a glow. One corner of the cave is darker still, and you nearly miss what's nestled there. A circle of stones, half buried in ash, with a bone placed carefully in the center. You don't touch it. You just stare. Was it ritual? Was it waste? Did someone leave it behind in haste or with purpose? You can't say. Historians still wonder about things like this. Whether some hearths marked sacred ground, or whether they simply reflected a family's preferred corner. Whether these bones belong to meals, pets, or people, the ash doesn't answer. But the silence does speak, and it tells you that something mattered here. Not just heat, but care. Not just flame, but what it made possible. Light, community, nourishment, memory. The fire here was tended, protected, passed on. And in doing so, it left something behind that no wind, no time, no water has managed to wash away. You sit until your legs go numb, until the cold starts crawling up your spine again. Then you rise, slowly, and begin to make your way back toward the entrance, glancing once more at the blackened hearths, the quiet bones, the soot-lined walls. You step out into the light, blinking as the sun welcomes you back, and you know that what you saw inside wasn't just a cave. It was the memory of a people who learned to live with flame, who stayed long enough for the fire to shape the space around them, and who, in doing so, left behind a quiet trail of warmth, waiting to be followed. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Even after thousands of years, even after all the bones have dried and the ashes settled, there's still a trace of it, a quiet, earthy thickness that clings to the back of your throat. It doesn't smell bad, exactly, just ancient. Stale meat, crushed roots, long-forgotten fats turned to dust. This is where the fire told the truth about what people really ate and what they got spectacularly wrong. The midden sits just beyond the main living chamber of the cave, tucked into a natural bowl in the rock, where waste was tossed without much ceremony. Over time, it built up into layers. Charred bones, burnt seed husks, bits of shell and fur. It's not a graveyard, not really. It's more like a diary, except instead of ink and paper, the story is told in leftovers. Some call it garbage, but here you understand it better. This is where the fire left its footprints. You crouch down near the edge and run your fingers through a patch of brittle black dust. It's soft as flour. This was wood once, bark and twigs, dried moss, and feathered edges of kindling, all burned long ago. Beneath it, small bones peek through. Bird, maybe, or rodent. Some cracked open, others left whole. You lift one and turn it in your hand. The end is scorched. Someone tried to cook this. Maybe they succeeded. Maybe they didn't notice until the smoke got weird, and the smell turned from savory to suspicious. It happens. There's a lot of evidence of overenthusiasm here. Big bones roasted until they shattered. Seeds that never softened, no matter how long they were boiled. Fish scales blackened to oblivion. Someone tried to cook something ambitious, clearly, something leafy and bitter that no one wanted seconds of. You can almost hear the complaints echoing through time. Whose idea was this? You said it wouldn't taste like tree bark. Well, the fire ate most of it anyway. And then there are the real mistakes, the toxic things. You don't need writing to figure it out. You see the half-burned pods of plants that no one tries again. The bitter roots, split open but never fully eaten. Some items show up in one layer and then never again. A single charred frog, a handful of shiny seeds, a few blackened mushrooms that must have looked promising until someone realized, a little too late, that interesting doesn't mean digestible. These experiments were costly, not just in food, but in lessons learned the hard way. Maybe someone got sick. Maybe they didn't survive. But the fire always recorded it, etched the memory into ash. The midden never forgets. You sift a little deeper and find broken shells, flattened and crisped. Some were likely cooked on hot stones, others buried in the coals until they popped open. The ones that worked show up again and again in the layers, proof that someone figured it out. Eventually, there's comfort in the repetition. As the layers go up, the mistakes become fewer. The bones get cleaner, split more evenly. You start to see the signs of patterns, burned ends, where the meat was scraped clean, before cooking clusters of small bones that suggest a favorite spot to sit and snack. Fragments of bark bowls used to carry hot embers or soup. Someone figured out that fire softened roots. That marrow was worth the effort. That fish tasted better with the skin crisped just right. The midden doesn't just show what people ate. It shows how they learned, how they shared. One charred fruit pit might have ended someone's appetite, but 24 clustered together in later layers say, "We figured it out, and we came back for more." The garbage heap becomes a textbook, a collection of trial and error scrawled in bone and soot. Sometimes, though, it gets personal. You find a carved bone, scorched at one end. It was decorative once, marked with shallow lines in repeating patterns. Maybe it was a child's, or a token kept near the hearth. Maybe it fell in by accident. Or maybe it was offered to the flames on purpose, a moment of farewell, or a ritual of letting go. There's no way to know. Historians still wonder if burned trinkets were discarded or sacrificed, and this one doesn't tell you either way. But it stayed. It burned. It became part of the record. Nearby, you find what's left of a small wooden tray, just the outline, really, preserved by the fire. It cradles bits of burned fat, now little more than greasy stains in the soil. Maybe someone used it to carry food to the fire. Maybe it was a makeshift plate. The shape of the wood is still there, and you imagine hands lifting it with care, bringing it close to the flame, hoping the meat wouldn't fall off before it crisped. There's something gentle about the way the fire preserved all this. Not precise, not deliberate, but gentle in its own way. It didn't just devour. It recorded. It remembered. Even the bad ideas. Even the burnt messes. Even the meals that ended in laughter or groans or small, smoky disasters. All of it mattered. All of it remained. You stand up, brushing dust from your hands, and glance back toward the living chamber. From here, it looks smaller, less dramatic, but the fire makes more sense now. It wasn't just for warmth. It wasn't just for light. It was the center of trial and taste, of memory and mistake. Everything you see, every soot-stained ceiling, every bone tucked in ash, tells the same story. That fire didn't just change what people ate. It changed how they lived. And just beyond the midden, further down a narrow path in the stone, is a space even quieter. Not the living area, not the kitchen corner. A place more intimate, more intentional, where the fire wasn't used to roast or boil, but to comfort, to care, to heal. You follow the narrowing corridor of stone until the walls begin to close in, not claustrophobically, but intimately. The air changes here. It smells less of soot and more of dust and limestone, like you've stepped not just deeper into the cave, but further into memory. The torchlight or beam in your hand flickers across uneven rock, and as your eyes adjust, you begin to see something unmistakable, something that no natural fire would have made on its own. There, sunk into the floor and ringed with darker rock, lies the outline of something deliberate. A shallow bowl, maybe 2 hand lengths across, filled with fine, ancient ash. The stones around it aren't just scorched randomly. They're blackened in a pattern, wider near the base, thinner toward the top. This isn't just a fire pit, it's a hearth. A place someone built, shaped, and used again and again. And then again after that. You kneel down, careful not to disturb the edges, and feel the slight dip where so many hands once crouched. So many meals were tended. So many nights were kept just a little less cold. Unlike the messy middens or scattered campfires from earlier in the cave, this feels focused, stable, like someone had finally said, "This is where it lives now." The flame, treated not like a guest or a tool, but like a member of the family, something that deserved a place of its own. The stones forming the ring aren't uniform, but they clearly didn't just fall there. They were chosen, collected, maybe from nearby riverbeds, maybe from long treks. Some are smoother, others flatter. A few have cracked over time from heat, splitting at odd angles. You notice one piece near the back that's darker than the rest, polished black, maybe from oils, maybe from years of hands pressing against it. It looks like the kind of place where someone might have leaned every evening, watching the fire settle for the night. This hearth didn't happen by accident. You can tell by how it was preserved. The layers of ash here aren't scattered. They've settled like sediment in a jar, light dust at the top, heavier carbon beneath. Someone came back, night after night, year after year, feeding this fire, caring for it, learning from it. There's a rhythm to the remains, a story told, not in lines, but in layers. You pick up a bit of burned bone from the edge of the hearth. It's small, likely from a bird or small mammal, and it's been cracked open, the marrow long since gone. Nearby, you spot a few shattered seed shells and what might once have been the charred rind of a fruit. Not a feast, perhaps, but a meal. Something shared, something roasted, something that filled more than just a stomach. Further out from the hearth, the signs of life expand gently. A circle of scorched pebbles likely once held tools, or maybe bowls of water for boiling. A few flakes of flint suggest tool sharpening or carving nearby. It's not just about heat, it's about rhythm. Life gravitated to this fire, settled around it, depended on it. And more striking still, no large bone fragments, no heavy ash piles, no signs of wood being dumped in haste. This fire was not for burning big meals or clearing brush. This was a quiet, controlled fire, a careful flame, possibly even sacred. Some researchers believe that these early hearths weren't always practical. They were symbolic, a way of saying, "We belong here," of anchoring memory and presence in a place where both were easy to lose. Historians still debate whether this hearth, and others like it, were owned by families or shared by the group, whether one person was in charge or whether everyone took turns keeping the flame alive. There are no carvings to explain it, no inscriptions, just the careful shape, the depth of the ash, and the quiet certainty that someone kept this fire alive long enough for it to matter. As you sit near it, you realize that this hearth doesn't just represent heat. It represents pause, the ability to stop wandering, even for a little while. The birth of home not as a structure, but as an idea. Fire became the center, and around that center, people began to orbit, to settle, to return. Even the cave itself seems to lean in around this place. The walls curve more closely. The ceiling lowers just enough to trap heat, but not so much to feel oppressive. The acoustics change, softer, more muffled. The echoes of your movements seem gentler here, quieter. Like this part of the cave remembers the sound of children giggling beside the flame, of someone softly humming while poking embers, of old voices muttering wisdom into the smoke. Not far from the hearth, in a shallower hollow against the back wall, you find remnants of another structure, possibly a smaller fire ring or a cooking platform. The stones there are darker, smoother, worn by years of use. You press your hand against one and feel the ghost of warmth. Not literal heat, of course, but something deeper, a kind of echo in the rock, like the memory of 1,000 evenings spent leaning close, whispering stories, oiling roots, rubbing your hands together, and sighing in relief. You begin to wonder how long this hearth was used. Months? Years? Did generations pass their nights around it? You picture the first one to sit here, lighting a cautious spark. Then another, years later, feeding coals into the same shallow ring. Then another, and another, until the act itself became tradition. Not because they were told to, but because the hearth had become a promise. You tend it because someone tended it for you. You sleep near it because someone once risked cold nights and heavy storms to learn how. Somewhere above you, far from this dark chamber, the world still moves forward. Grass grows, rivers shift, trees fall and rise again. But this place has not moved. This hearth, nestled into the stone floor like a sleeping heart, is still here, still shaped by those first hands, still holding their memory in every grain of ash, every flake of soot that the wind forgot. You rise slowly, careful not to scatter the dust with your boots, and let your eyes linger one more time on the quiet circle of blackened stone. This wasn't just where fire lived. This was where everything else began. The further you move into the heart of the cave, the more the walls seem to close in, not out of menace, but out of familiarity. The stone overhead dips low, not enough to make you crouch, but enough to make you notice your breath, your steps, your very presence inside this space. You can feel how the air changes, less fresh, less crisp, but still breathable. Heavy, though, dense with the weight of every fire that's ever burned here, with every puff of smoke that never quite made it out the door. This is the kind of place where life didn't just pass through. It settled, it steeped, and it stayed. The ceiling above you is black, not in patches, not in streaks, but in one broad, uneven swath that stretches from wall to wall. You shine your light upward and see the texture, cracks, curves, chips from where rock flaked under years of heat and soot. It looks almost like leather, taut and worn, except it's stone. Stone stained with the breath of 1,000 hearths. The smoke didn't rise in a straight line here. It curled, clung, hung in the air like a second skin, and over time, it etched itself into the rock. At first, you might think this would have been unpleasant. After all, no one enjoys a smoky room now, so why would they then? But here's the thing. People adapted. They didn't just live beneath this smoky ceiling. They learned to read it, to shape their lives around it. They placed their hearths in specific places not just for warmth, but for airflow. They carved tiny vents where they could. They kept the ceiling low to trap heat, and let the smoke hover just above their heads. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. You imagine waking up here in the dimness, blinking sleep from your eyes as the fire's last embers glow faintly beside you. Above, the ceiling pulses gently in the flickering light, its blackness like an ancient sky. You stretch, cough once, maybe twice, just part of the morning routine, and reach for twigs and moss to coax the flame back to life. You can smell the stone itself, always warm, always carrying a hint of last night's smoke. It settles into your hair, your clothes, your skin. You don't fight it. You simply carry it with you. Children grow up here, thinking this is what the world smells like. And for them, it is. They learn to tell the difference between fresh smoke and smoke that signals trouble. Damp wood, strange fumes, something rotting too close to the flame. Their games revolve around the fire, racing shadows on the wall, roasting bits of root or insect to see what crisps best, daring each other to get closer to the glowing stones without getting scorched. Their laughter echoes up and is swallowed by the blackness above. And the elders, well, they watch. They sit with their backs against the soot-lined walls, their legs stretched toward the heat, eyes half closed. They've breathed this ceiling for decades. They've seen it change color, grow darker, acquire new layers with each season. To them, the ceiling is a memory. They can point to stains and recall the fire that caused them. That big arc there? That was the wet winter, when the wood smoked more than it burned. That streak? A cooking fire that flared too high one night and nearly singed someone's eyebrows off. That oddly pale patch in the corner? A sign that someone forgot to stoke the flames for days, and the smoke stopped reaching that far. There's a kind of pride in it. Not flashy, not declared, but present. The way someone in a modern city might glance up at a brick wall covered in ivy and say, "That's been here a while." The smoky ceiling is their ivy, their mark of time. And beneath it, life continues with a rhythm that the fire sets. You eat when there's heat. You rest when the coals glow low. You talk in soft voices so the stories don't get lost in the smoke. You arrange your sleeping spot so the fumes drift just past your head, not directly into your face. You rotate places near the hearth, not out of fairness, but out of comfort. Too close, and the heat overwhelms. Too far, and the cold seeps in. Everything, from the placement of stones to the schedule of chores, revolves around that ceiling. It tells you what the fire is doing, what the wind is doing, what the weather outside might be, without even stepping into it. A thick buildup of smoke near the ground? Storms likely coming. A clear current flowing to the back of the cave? Dry air. Good night to burn the fattier bits. The ceiling doesn't just shelter you. It informs you. You notice, too, the lack of decoration up there. Unlike other walls of the cave, where smudges and markings appear, the ceiling remains mostly blank. Not because it wasn't important, but because it was sacred in a different way. You didn't paint on the sky. You read it. And even now, long after the fires have gone out, the ceiling still holds their breath. If you run your hand across it, your fingers come back darkened, as if the smoke never truly left. You resist the urge to smear that soot across your face, to trace shapes the way they might have in some distant moment. Instead, you simply look up and listen, because you can almost hear it. The crackle, the pop, the sighs of people shifting in their sleep, the clatter of stones being moved closer to the fire, the scrape of a bowl, the quiet cough of someone waking to feed the flame. All of it hangs there, caught just beneath the blackened rock, looping endlessly like a lullaby that never quite fades. And in that quiet, beneath that heavy, smoky ceiling, you understand why they stayed, why they built their lives here, breath after breath, spark after spark. It wasn't just shelter. It was continuity, suspended in soot. You wouldn't notice it right away. Not when you first step into this part of the cave, still blinking off the last of the firelight from behind you, still carrying the scent of soot and warm stone on your clothes. But then your foot lands on something, not sharp, but firm and unmistakably hollow. You pause, crouch, brush away the fine gray dust and charcoal flakes, and there it is. A bone, smooth, ancient, not broken for marrow, not discarded beside the hearth or cast into the refuse heap, just resting, intact. At first, you assume it's animal. Maybe deer, maybe something smaller. But as you continue, you find more. A curve of a rib, the rounded cap of a femur, a flat, delicate piece of what might once have been a skull. None of it arranged like a burial. No grave pit, no clear ritual markers. And yet, it doesn't feel like trash either. These bones weren't left behind by accident. They were placed, settled, almost as though the fire didn't just feed bodies. It remembered them. The deeper you look, the more patterns begin to emerge. Bones placed near blackened stones. Scattered remains clustered just beyond the edges of long-dead hearths. Some pieces scorched, others bleached. You begin to suspect that these people didn't draw a hard line between the sacred and the practical. The fire was both. It was how you survived and how you said goodbye. You imagine a night long ago, the cave dimly lit, the fire burning low. Someone has died, a parent, a child, a friend who once carried the spark during a storm. There are no songs, no speeches, just the sound of breath and the slow gathering of kindling. They don't bury the body, not right away. They keep it close, not out of fear, but of familiarity, of need. Maybe they burn some part of it. Maybe only the bones remain. And the bones, they stay. Not tucked away, not hidden, but kept where the fire still touches them. Historians still debate the meaning of these arrangements. Were they early cremations? Offerings? Simple acts of convenience in a time before formal rites? But what's undeniable is the care, the repetition, the fact that fire and bones appear again and again in the same quiet corners. Like the warmth of the flame was somehow meant to linger over those who had gone before. As if the ancestors, too, needed heat. You glance up at the wall and notice marks, faint smudges shaped like hands, not painted, just pressed over and over into soot-darkened stone. They're clustered here, close to where the bones rest, as if those left behind came often, touched the wall, sat beside the remains, let the fire warm their backs while memories warmed the rest. The handprints are layered, one atop another, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger, as though generations passed through, all leaving their marks in the same silent spot. And the fire didn't judge. It simply burned, gently, softly, carrying the scent of smoke and maybe something else. Something floral, or sweet, or bitter. Whatever plants they placed into the flames, perhaps as tribute, or simply for the smell, it all became part of the moment, the memory, the ritual, even if they didn't call it that. Smoke doesn't just rise. It swirls, lingers, and sometimes wraps itself around things like a shroud. You shift further inward and find a stone basin, shallow and worn smooth by time. It's been blackened by fire, but the sides show signs of scraping. Ash, maybe, or ground bone, it's hard to say. But it sat near the fire, always. You can tell by the layers of soot beneath it. Something about that speaks volumes. This wasn't an accident of storage. It was intentional. A place to hold what remained. The basin might have been used to prepare offerings, or maybe to simply hold the bones before they were laid to rest in a familiar spot. Some of the surrounding stones are flat and clean, forming a rough semicircle around the area. Not for sitting, exactly. More like a frame, a way to mark that this place mattered. It isn't flashy. There's no altar, no symbols. Just the simplicity of stones placed with meaning, like punctuation in a sentence of silence. You begin to notice how the presence of bones affects everything else. Fires here were smaller, quieter, the ash around them layered more slowly, as though people came to tend, not to feast, to warm themselves, but not laugh loudly. There's a hush in the air you can still feel, even now, as if the walls learned to listen. One day, someone must have tended a fire while watching over these bones. Maybe more than once, maybe every night for a season. the sparks rising beside them, the smoke drifting across old remains. Maybe they whispered stories, or maybe they said nothing at all, just watched the flames flicker and waited for something they couldn't name to pass. There's something healing in that stillness, in the quiet companionship of the living and the dead. And over time, this became a habit, a pattern, a tradition, if not quite a ceremony. The fire taught them how to mourn, not with tears, but with care, with coals placed just right, with bones laid gently near the heat, with hands pressing soot into stone. You wonder if any of them feared it. The dead, the quiet, the idea that one day their bones would join the rest. But probably not. Probably they just accepted it the way they accepted wind in winter. A thing that comes and passes and leaves you warm for a while before it fades. The idea that fire could serve both the living and the dead may seem strange now, but here it feels natural, necessary even. The flames gave you life, and in return, you gave them memory. Smoke, it turns out, carries more than scent. It carries presence. So when the fire finally goes out in this part of the cave, when the last embers settle into ash and the bones rest in stillness, you know it won't be the end. Someone else will come. Someone always does. They'll bring dry wood. They'll strike a spark. And as the light returns, they'll sit near the bones, shoulders hunched, eyes low, waiting for the warmth to return. And in that glow, the ancestors will be there too. The strange thing about ash is how impermanent it seems at first. It scatters with the slightest breeze. It clings to your skin, your hair, your breath, and yet slips through your fingers as if it were never there. And still, here in the farthest chamber of the cave, beneath a ceiling so thick with soot, it seems to absorb even light, the ash has stayed. Not just for a season, not for a decade, but for 1,000,000 years. Pressed gently into the layers of earth like a fingerprint, no time can smudge. You kneel at the edge of a low shelf of rock, and your eyes catch the faint contrast of texture against the surrounding floor. It's not just dirt here, not just dust or debris. This is ash, pale, fine, softly compressed like a page in a forgotten book. The cave's breath doesn't stir it. The vibrations of your steps don't dislodge it. And when you pass your fingers over its surface, there's no puff of smoke or ghost of heat, only the faintest velvety resistance, as though the ash has grown comfortable in its stillness and doesn't want to be moved. What makes it even more remarkable is where it lies, not near a grand hearth, not beside the main chamber where fires once roared and people gathered. This ash rests in a quiet recess, tucked behind the bustle of life, where shadows pool and the stone walls lean in. It's a humble spot, unremarkable at first glance. But here lies one of the oldest known hearths. Not the remnants of an accident, but the quiet evidence of care. This was no wildfire's mark. This wasn't the result of a dry branch catching during a storm. This was sustained, tended. A deliberate fire that burned over days, maybe weeks, maybe more. Someone came back again and again, feeding it gently, shielding it from wind and rain, coaxing it to stay. That alone speaks volumes. Because anyone can start a fire. But to keep one alive, that's something else entirely. That's devotion. You imagine the hands that once hovered near this fire, not just warming themselves, but arranging twigs with purpose, watching how the coals nestled, judging when to add fuel, when to let the flames rest. These weren't random movements. They were learned, rehearsed, passed from one person to another, not in words, but in actions. The fire was a living thing, and it needed tending just as surely as a child or a wound. Even though the people who once crouched here had no pottery, no writing, no grand structures, this ash speaks for them. It says, we were here, we made this, and we stayed. It says they found something worth protecting, even if it could never be held. They didn't leave behind stone monuments or carved stories. but they left warmth, gently folded into the soil. Above this ash, time moved on. Ice crawled across the land. Herds migrated and vanished. Languages were born and forgotten. But this layer remained, unbothered, undisturbed. It sat beneath dust, beneath rock, beneath the weight of 100,000 sunrises, waiting, not for glory, just for a quiet set of eyes to find it again. You picture the final night the fire might have burned here. Someone sitting cross-legged, tired, stirring the coals with a stick worn smooth by use. Maybe the wood ran out. Maybe they were called away. Maybe they simply forgot. The ember faded. The heat bled away. And when the last curl of smoke drifted into the dark, the ash settled and stayed. No one returned to relight it, not for a very, very long time. And now, somehow, you are here, not to relight it, but to witness what remains, to breathe the same cool air, to touch the outline of that old hearth with a sense of wonder the original firekeepers never knew they'd inspire. You don't need to be a scientist to feel it. That pull, that hush, that fragile awe that comes with seeing something that almost didn't survive, and yet somehow did. Historians still debate whether this is the world's oldest evidence of a controlled fire. Some argue there are other caves, other hearths with claims just as strong. Others insist this is the real beginning, the moment where fire stopped being just a gift of the storm and became something else, a companion. But in this cave, among this ash, the debate feels far away. The facts are quiet here. The truth, however incomplete, rests gently on the floor. It's easy to forget how little fire leaves behind. There are no glowing coals in the fossil record, no flickering shadows trapped in stone, only ash. But here, that ash is everything. It becomes a relic, not just of survival, but of patience, of countless days and nights tending a fragile thing without knowing where it might lead. You reach down one last time and press your palm to the earth. The surface is soft, almost like flour. It offers no heat, but something else, a sense of presence, of memory, of care laid down in layers thinner than parchment, deeper than words. This was never meant to be a monument, and yet here it is, a moment caught forever in silence. You stand slowly, brushing soot from your fingers, now lightly streaked with the same dust that once clung to someone else's skin 1,000,000 years ago. The fire has guided you through so much danger, invention, comfort, chaos, and now, in this stillness, it offers one final gift: perspective. You turn, ready to leave the quiet of the ash behind. And as your footsteps carry you forward, you hear something unexpected, not the sound of flames, but the low hum of voices. The scent in the air shifts. Less smoke, more bodies, more presence. You're not alone. There's someone else near the fire now. Not an ancient figure crouched with tinder, but a modern one. A keeper, not of flame, but of knowledge. Someone whose job is no longer to feed the fire, but to remember how it was once fed. And through the dim orange flicker ahead, you see them waiting, cross-legged, quiet, hands resting in their lap, eyes calm and steady, reflecting the same glow that lit this cave 1,000,000 years ago. It always begins in the dark. Before the sun even brushes the mouth of the cave, before the birds begin their sleepy tuning, before the others stir under their pelts, your eyes blink open. Not from a sound, not from any urgent movement. Just that quiet instinct, the same one that has been waking you at this hour for longer than you can remember. The fire needs you. Not dramatically, not with desperation. Just gently. It is low, breathing slow. If you wait too long, it won't breathe at all. You sit up, rubbing sleep from your eyes with the back of your hand, the pelt falling from your shoulders as cold air settles in. The cave is still. You can hear your own joints shift as you move. The faint crackle is gone. The warm roar has become a soft, fading pulse. But as you glance toward the hearth, tucked close to the stone wall, you see the faintest hint of color under the mound of ash. It's not dead, not yet, but close. You know this rhythm too well now. There was never a day someone pointed at you and gave you the duty. But bit by bit, you became the one who noticed first, who woke before the warmth faded, who kept the flame from slipping away. Some mornings, it feels like the ember pulls you from sleep before your body's ready, as if it calls to you without voice, just presence. It's not a chore, not a task. It's a thread, a small glowing tether to something older than memory. You crawl across the cave floor, careful not to stir the others. Ash and grit cling to your hands and knees as you move. The air is colder than it was the night before. Not bitter, but sharp enough to nip at your nose and settle into your joints. You breathe out slowly. Your breath curls in front of you, a pale wisp in the firelight, and then disappears into the ceiling darkness. The ember is small, shy, a single eye of orange heat tucked beneath the ashen blanket. You crouch close, hands on either side, drawing in its thin warmth. You speak to it without words, just presence. You're here. You're awake. You won't let it go out. You already know where your kindling is. It's the first thing you prepare before bed every night. The moss you dried 2 days ago. The twigs you set aside in a nook above the floor. The bark curled just enough to cradle a spark. You unwrap it now, careful not to scatter anything, and place the bundle beside the pit. Everything you need is there, as it always is. With practiced hands, you take the stick used only for this, its end scorched and smoothed by countless mornings. You stir the ash, gently brushing aside the cold top layer. There. The ember glows a little brighter as you expose it to air. You lean in and blow, not hard, not rushed, just a slow exhale, like feeding a sleeping animal from your palm. A thin strand of smoke curls upward. The ember deepens its glow. You nestle the moss close and blow again. This time longer. You feel the warmth respond, faint but rising. You layer the bark and the smallest twigs with care, adjusting them as if arranging fragile shells. Another breath, another flicker, and then there it is. Not a spark this time, but a curl. A whisper of orange that catches the bark's edge, then slides along the twig. The flame shivers once, almost doubtful, and then holds. You feed it gently, a twig at a time, until the fire is real again. Not large, not noisy, but enough. Enough to keep the cave warm. Enough to cook. Enough to carry the day. You sit back and stretch your legs, letting the heat ease into your knees. Your fingers still smell faintly of smoke and bark. The others are still asleep, huddled shapes under hides, limbs tucked against cold stone. No one sees you. No one knows how close the fire came to slipping into silence. You don't mention it. You never do. The fire doesn't need applause. It only needs keeping. Sometimes, as you watch it grow, you think of the ones who kept fire before you. Not just the elders in your clan, but the ones long before that. The first to learn not just how to catch fire, but how to carry it. How to pass it from day to day, from one careful soul to another. There must have been a first keeper. Someone who noticed the way the embers still glowed after the blaze had died. Someone who learned how to coax them back to life. Someone who, perhaps like you, woke quietly before dawn and kept a whole group from waking in the cold. Historians still wonder when firekeeping truly began. Was it a single discovery? Or a slow, stumbling series of mistakes and miracles? Were the first fire tenders celebrated? Or, like you, did they simply rise in silence and do what was needed? No one knows. The evidence is ashes and scorched bone. Nothing that explains intent. But here, you feel it. That thread. That quiet sense of duty wrapped in warmth. The fire begins to crackle now. Soft and steady. The shadows shift against the cave wall. Someone stirs in their sleep, pulling a pelt tighter. The child nearest the fire rolls over and smiles faintly, never waking. You pour a little more fuel on, not too much, and sit closer. The warmth reaches into your arms, your chest, your cheeks. You let your eyes fall half shut, not to sleep again, but just to rest. You've done your part. The ember lives. It will rise with the sun, and somewhere far below the cave, pressed deep in the sediment and memory of the earth, another ember waits. It has no light, no smoke, but it remembers. And maybe, in some way, it wakes when you do. You don't wake up planning to be chased by wolves. No one does. That's never the plan. The plan is simple. Slip out early, gather dry wood, and come back with enough fuel to keep the fire breathing for another day. You're not out to win any glory or spark awe among your cave mates. You're just here to keep the ember alive, quietly, predictably. But as you sit up beneath your fur this morning, rubbing the sleep from your eyes and listening to the hush beyond the stone walls, something feels different. It's not loud. That's the strange part. It's the absence that hits you first. No morning scuffling. No birds chirping from the trees outside. No wind to stir the brush. Just stillness. The kind that settles into your spine before your thoughts have a chance to catch up. You pause, one hand resting on the smooth ground beside your sleeping space. The fire still flickers behind you, barely alive, casting a soft orange light that paints the cave walls with gentle pulses. You glance at it, reassuring yourself it's still going. Then, careful not to wake the others, you gather your bundle strap and step outside. The morning light hasn't yet broken through the canopy. A dull silver haze sits over the trees, not quite day, but no longer night. You breathe in, and the air tastes like moss and old stone touched by something sharper. You shift your pouch over your shoulder and descend along the familiar path, the one that winds past the hollow tree and down toward the ridge where the driest wood always seems to hide. You've done this walk so many times your feet barely need direction. You know which patches of earth hold hidden roots that could trip you, which rocks to avoid when the dew is thickest, and which stones make too much noise underfoot. There's a rhythm to these mornings. You let it guide you. The cold presses against your cheeks and fingers, but your body warms with movement. The kindling trees wait near the slope, their thin, bark-peeled branches easy to strip and bundle. As you begin gathering, you let your thoughts drift, the way you always do. Sometimes you hum. Sometimes you think about how nice it'll be to sit close to the fire later, the dry wood catching with a single breath. You crack branches between your palms and stack them against your hip, checking each one for dampness. Snap, shake, tuck. You move in the half-light like a figure out of habit more than intention. Then, something shifts. Not a noise, exactly. A quiet gone quieter. A pause in the world. You freeze. There, a step. Just one, not yours. You straighten slowly, scanning the tree line. For a moment, you see nothing but bark and fog. Then, movement. A flicker of gray against gray. Low to the ground. Deliberate. A wolf. No two. Your breath stays shallow. Not out of panic, but calculation. Wolves don't charge unless they mean to. They test. They measure. You've seen it before. These ones are watching you. Not with wildness, but with patience. You glance down at your bundle. Sticks. Nothing useful in a fight. You reach, slowly, deliberately, for a rock the size of your palm. Smooth, dense. You hold it low, not to throw yet, just to feel the weight of it in your fingers. The wolves don't move. One tilts its head. The other sniffs the air. Their muscles are still, but you know tension when you see it. The kind that waits for a decision. You murmur, not words, just sound. A low tone, almost like a song hummed into your teeth. Not threatening, not submissive, just human. Sometimes that's enough to shift the balance. You take a step back, then another. Slow, measured. The kind of movement that says, I'm leaving, but I'm not running. Running would be the worst thing you could do. Wolves chase what flees. You learned that long ago, watching someone else make the mistake. You don't plan to repeat it. The forest seems to lean in around you. Every tree a potential shadow. Every bush a place where breath might be hiding. You continue backing up, adjusting your bundle to keep it quiet. The wolves don't advance, but they don't leave either. They watch, like they're not sure whether to commit. You edge toward the thicker brambles, the ones that snag at your ankles and resist passage. They're annoying, but they buy you time. Wolves don't like brambles. Too unpredictable. Too much noise. When you pass between them, you move faster, ducking under the branches and skipping the trail entirely. Every snapped twig behind you feels louder than it should. Finally, after a long stretch of quiet panic masked as control, the mouth of the cave appears through the brush, familiar and safe. You duck inside, heart pounding now that it's allowed to. The fire greets you with a tired crackle, its warmth tugging at your skin like a welcome. You drop the bundle beside the hearth and let out a breath you didn't know you'd been holding. No one else seems to notice your return. A few are still asleep. One child rolls over and sighs. Another picks at a scab on their knee. Someone grunts and begins poking at the ashes with a charred stick. You sit, pretending your legs aren't shaking. You add one of your twigs to the coals. It catches. The fire, oblivious to your trouble, grows brighter. It doesn't care what nearly happened out there. It only asks for fuel. It only knows you kept your promise. You glance back toward the cave entrance. Just for a moment, nothing follows. No fur, no teeth, no yellow eyes. Just fog rolling over the hill, the trees folding the morning back into themselves like nothing ever happened. Historians still debate how often our ancestors had to fight for fire, not just from nature, but from nature's teeth and claws. Was gathering wood always this risky? Was it always a dance between usefulness and becoming the next meal? The ancient bones don't say. They don't carry the fear. But the memory of moments like this is buried somewhere deeper than fossil. It's stitched into your instinct, etched beneath your ribs. You feed the fire another branch, and this one cracks loud, a bright sound that makes someone nearby startle and laugh. You smile too, finally. Not because it's funny, but because you're here. You're back. The fire lives. It's your turn to stay behind. Again. No early trek to the riverbanks for reeds. No walk down to the thicket for dry twigs. No tagging along on the hunt for anything with legs worth roasting. Just the fire. Just the cave. Just the children. The morning begins with good intentions. You imagine yourself tending the flame with quiet precision, adjusting logs, watching smoke rise through the vent, maybe even having a moment to sit back and appreciate the satisfying crackle of a steady fire. Instead, you're greeted by the shriek of a small child, insisting that someone else stole the big stick. That big stick, unfortunately, was a prime piece of kindling. It's now being wielded as a scepter of justice. You sigh and shuffle toward the noise, snatching the stick mid-swing and replacing it with a less flammable alternative. One of the toddlers starts crying. Another decides now is a good time to throw a pebble into the fire just to see what happens. What happens, of course, is a sharp pop, a hiss of steam, and a very smug look from the pebble thrower. You rub your temple with one hand and carefully poke the fire with the other. It's low, lazy, curled around itself in slow orange spirals. The embers underneath are strong, though. They pulse gently, like the fire is breathing. It always feels a little alive when you look closely enough. Just a creature in need of constant feeding. but never too much at once. The children swarm nearby, half interested in the fire, half focused on a game involving small bones and unfair rules. You've learned it's best not to ask the rules. They change every few minutes anyway. You shift a larger log into place, angling it just right to avoid a smoky collapse. The fire thanks you with a flare and a soft whoosh of heat across your face. Someone in the back of the cave yells, "They're touching my fur." And you turn to see a tug of war over a ragged animal pelt. Before you can respond, the younger of the two combatants trips over the fire tender's stool and lands in a heap. No burns, just surprise. Still, tears begin immediately, as if the injury were made of embarrassment alone. You scoop them up and soothe them with a soft hum, pacing a slow circle near the fire. Their little arms wrap around your neck like they've forgotten the whole event. Maybe they have. Children forget pain as easily as they cause chaos. It's their superpower. The fire behind you cracks sharply, just enough to pull your eyes back. One of the older kids has been poking a half-charred stick deep into the coals. You pause, watching them. They're not being reckless, just curious, focused. They tilt their head like the flames are speaking a language they almost understand. You don't stop them. Not yet. Curiosity, when not left completely unsupervised, is a fair teacher. They eventually glance up, meet your eye, and pull the stick back, satisfied. You nod. They nod back. A wordless agreement. That was enough for today. You return to your sitting stone, gently nudging a log back into place. One of the kids starts humming, a tune with no beginning or end, just notes rising and falling like smoke. Another joins in, and a third. It becomes a sort of rhythm. Somewhere in the back, someone starts tapping sticks against the cave wall. The sounds mingle, hum, tap, giggle, crackle, and somehow it all fits. You let your eyes drift to the entrance. The daylight is soft now, washing across the stone like warm breath. Dust dances in the beam. The wind outside is quiet. It's a rare moment, not silence, but peace. Even in the chaos, even with ash under your fingernails, and 3 children arguing over whose turn it is to guard the invisible saber-toothed cat, there's a stillness under it all, a calm center. The fire is holding. That's what matters. Historians still debate when exactly our ancestors began allowing children near the hearth. Was it out of necessity or something gentler? Were children kept away until they could understand danger, or did they learn by living alongside it? The bones don't say. But here, now, in this cave filled with laughter and mild bickering, the answer feels obvious. You remember being a child yourself, watching the flame with wide eyes, reaching for it and being pulled back, learning that it burned, but also that it warmed, that it could hurt, but also help. It never stopped being mysterious. It just became familiar. A younger child crawls into your lap, dragging a carved bone figure that's been chewed beyond recognition. They hold it up to you like a prize. It guards the fire now, they declare. You place it gently near the hearth, beside a rounded stone. It topples immediately. The child claps anyway. The flames flicker, brighter now. The wood is catching beautifully. You add another branch, carefully, slowly, not because you have to, but because you enjoy it. There's satisfaction in the balance. Not too much fuel at once, not too little. Like telling a story with pauses that matter. Another shriek rises from the back, followed by a long pause. You wait. No tears, just laughter. You smile. The fire doesn't mind the noise. In fact, it seems to grow stronger in the warmth of it. You lean back against the wall, child still in your lap, the fire glowing gold across your legs. You let your fingers drift through the child's hair. Their breathing slows. They're finally still. The others will return soon. The gatherers, the hunters, The elders with strong opinions and quiet smiles. They'll see the fire alive, children alive, you alive, and they'll know the work was done right. You glance once more at the hearth. The figure guarding the flames has fallen sideways again. You leave it like that. The fire doesn't need perfection. It just needs presence. By midday, everything starts to unravel. That's how it goes. Mornings are for preparation, gathering wood, stoking the fire, herding the little ones away from anything sharp or flammable. But midday, that's when chaos shows up wearing a cloak of responsibility. That's when people return from gathering trips, dragging baskets full of roots, bruised berries, and suspicious mushrooms. That's when hunters appear with just enough meat to excite everyone, but not enough to satisfy anyone. And that's when you, the one left with the fire, become the center of the universe. Because now it's time to cook. You should have seen it coming. The moment you heard the rustle of feet on gravel near the cave entrance and caught the heavy scent of freshly killed something, your stomach dropped. Not out of dread, exactly. More like quiet dread's lazier cousin. You've been here before. The moment someone drops a blood-slicked haunch of meat near the hearth with an expectant grin, you know it's coming. A dozen voices chiming in, offering helpful suggestions that contradict each other completely. Don't overcook it like last time. Add salt, no, the white one. Not the weird gray one. Let it char on the edges. That's where the taste lives. Didn't someone say we're not supposed to eat this part? Make sure my piece is the heart? You nod at all of them and none of them, leaning into the fire with your cooking stone already warming. The flames are healthy, which is good. For now. But feeding a few hungry bellies is one thing. Coordinating lunch for the entire clan is another. Especially when your pantry consists of exactly what was yanked out of the dirt and carried on someone's back. The meat is slapped unceremoniously beside you, and someone else dumps a pile of roots onto a nearby flat stone like they're offering treasure. Half of them are the kind that taste sweet when roasted. The other half might make you mildly hallucinate or violently ill, depending on how long they've been underground. You give them a wary sniff and start separating them. The younger kids sense the impending feast and hover nearby. One of them tries to sneak a bite of something raw. You gently swat their hand away and shove a cleaner piece of root into their mouth instead, softened with yesterday's ashes and a little wishful thinking. They chew without complaint. You work quickly, peeling bark from the roots with a shard of flint, slicing meat into thinner strips that will cook faster. Your hands move without thinking, but your mind is racing, calculating how long each log has been burning, how much wood is left, whether the wind will change direction, and send smoke straight into everyone's eyes just as the food's ready. The fire flares as you add more fuel, just enough to create a hot base without sending sparks flying. You nestle the thickest root slices around the outer ring and set the meat strips onto the center stone. They sizzle instantly, and everyone within nose range turns their heads at once, like a herd of deer catching scent. You feel a dozen pairs of eyes boring into your back. No pressure. Then comes the smoke. Someone, likely trying to be helpful, tosses a damp piece of wood onto the fire. You hear the hiss before you see the cloud, thick and gray and rising like a storm from the hearth. It chokes your lungs and makes the meat taste like regret. You cough, wave a hand, and pull the offending log out with a charred stick, muttering something about how this is why you don't let anyone else touch the fire. There's a collective groan. People start pacing. One of the older children asks how long it's going to take. You don't respond. Not because you're ignoring them, but because you're concentrating on the meat that's now deciding to cook unevenly. One side is browning beautifully. The other is curling like a dried leaf. You flip the pieces, adjust the stones, and blow on the embers with a slow, controlled breath. A few sparks rise, friendly ones, not threatening, and the heat steadies again. The roots are another matter. A few are blackened. A few are still cold. One has burst and is leaking something that smells faintly, like wet bark and disappointment. You nudge them apart and place the thicker ones closer to the flame, hoping the inside catches up before the outside becomes ash. Behind you, the arguing has started again. Someone wants to eat now. Someone else insists it needs to rest like it's a sacred ritual. The oldest woman in the group leans in and starts to explain, again, how her mother used to cook meat over flat stones with herbs you definitely don't have. She offers you a rock that she claims helps flavor the smoke. You thank her and pocket the rock to keep her happy. Finally, one of the strips starts to char on the edge, just slightly, exactly the way most people seem to like it. You grab a clean leaf, scoop it up, and wave it slightly to cool. The smell is perfect. Warm, earthy, smoky without bitterness. You hand it off to the nearest hand, and within seconds, the crowd presses closer. They descend like warm, impatient vultures. Hands reach in from every direction. You portion out what you can, bit by bit, root by root, charred edge by edge, until your fingers are sore and your knees ache from crouching. You eat your own piece standing, watching everyone else chew with suspicious silence. A minute later, the fire crackles happily, almost smug. It knows. You did it. You fed them. You kept the flame steady and didn't let anyone burn themselves, at least not seriously. One toddler has ash on their cheek, but that's practically ceremonial at this point. Historians still debate the exact moment communal cooking became a daily ritual rather than a novelty. Was it fire's steady warmth that brought people closer? Or was it the hunger that demanded sharing? Maybe it was both. Maybe it was just you, sweaty, ash-covered, and squinting through smoke, making sure the fire served everyone equally. You settle down beside the hearth, finally breathing fully again. The last strip of meat crackles softly behind you, just a little overcooked. No one complains. The children are already fighting over the final piece. The elders lean back with full bellies and smug expressions. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the heat seep into your sore hands. The crisis has passed. For now, by the time the sun begins its long slide behind the ridge, the fire is already lowering its voice. It crackles less now, soft, slow exhalations rising as coils of smoke twist upward and vanish through the chimney hole above. The day's heat lingers in the stone, seeping into your legs, your arms, your thoughts. It's the kind of warmth that invites stillness, the kind that makes your muscles ache in that pleasant, heavy way that says, you did enough today. You made it through. You shift a little on your sitting stone and stretch your legs, watching the last light fold across the cave walls. Long shadows stretch behind baskets and pelts, creating a geography of darkness that shifts with every flicker of flame. A faint breeze rustles the grasses just outside, carrying with it the cooling scent of evening, damp earth, distant water, the green breath of trees settling into night. The fire glows, lazy but alive. You don't need to prod it anymore. It breathes on its own now, curling slow fingers around blackened wood, radiating comfort without asking for attention. The transition from day to evening happens in stages here, marked not by clocks or bells, but by the subtle choreography of bodies finding their places around the hearth. First come the mothers with nursing babies, seeking the warmth for small bodies that haven't yet learned to hold heat on their own. Then the craftspeople, their hands still smudged with clay or stained with plant dyes, finally setting aside their work as shadows make fine details impossible to see. The hunters drift in last, their voices still carrying traces of the day's adventures, but growing softer as the fire's influence takes hold. Someone adds a few twigs, not to cook, not for fuel, but just to keep the rhythm going. The flames curl up in welcome, casting an orange shimmer on every nearby face, painting them all in the same warm hues that make strangers look like family and family look like something more than human. The children, full from their evening meal, begin to drift toward the hearth in clumps. Some slump over in their parents' laps, small hands clutching at familiar textures of leather and fur. Others sprawl out like overfed pups on piles of carefully arranged bedding, their limbs loose with satisfaction and approaching sleep. One or two still jabber quietly, trying to keep the day's excitement from slipping away too soon, sharing discoveries of interesting stones, glimpses of distant animals, the taste of a particularly sweet berry found in a hidden patch. You can't blame them. The day felt long and full, packed with small wonders that deserve to be spoken aloud before they fade. The cave itself seems to exhale as evening settles, releasing the accumulated warmth and activity of the day. Cooking smells still linger, roasted roots, the smoky char of meat, the bitter green scent of boiled leaves that serve as medicine or seasoning. Tools rest in their appointed places, cleaned and ready for tomorrow's use. Sleeping areas have been arranged and rearranged as people claim their spots for the night. Children negotiating for proximity to parents. Elders settling into the places where the stone has been worn smooth by countless nights of rest. Then, as always, the old ones begin to stir, not in body, but in voice. It starts with the faintest throat clear, more signal than sound. That quiet little cough that tells everyone nearby. The stories are about to begin. There's no announcement, no formal gathering. People simply know. It's written in the angle of shoulders, the way conversations naturally fade, the manner in which eyes begin to turn toward the eldest members of the clan, who sit closest to the fire's heart. You turn slightly toward the speaker, a familiar elder wrapped in a patchwork of hides that tells its own story, each piece carefully chosen and placed. Some from animals they hunted in their youth, others gifted by children and grandchildren. A few so old their origins have become legend themselves. Their hair is braided thick with age and smoke, silver strands catching the firelight like captured starshine. Deep lines map their face, each one earned through seasons of laughter, worry, concentration, and the simple passage of time under sun and stars. They don't rush. They don't have to. In a world where survival often demands quick decisions and faster reflexes, this moment belongs to deliberation, to the luxury of choosing words as carefully as one might select stones for a tool. They speak like the fire moves, slow, deliberate, and with a rhythm no one dares interrupt. Their voice carries the weight of memory, not just their own, but the accumulated wisdom of all who came before. You listen with your whole body, not just your ears. Your skin receives the warmth of their words. Your muscles relax into the familiar cadence. Your breathing slows to match the pace of the tale. Tonight, the tale begins with a mammoth. No surprise there. Most stories do. These great creatures dominate, not just the landscape, but the imagination, their massive forms. An ancient wisdom making them natural subjects for stories that need to carry weight, that need to stick in memory long after the telling. But this one is different. Not about the hunt, not about the triumph or the meat or the feast that follows a successful kill. This story is about the mammoth that escaped, the one too clever for traps, too quick for spears, too stubborn to die. The elder tells it like a fable, but you suspect there's a memory hiding inside the laughter, a real encounter that has been polished and shaped through countless retellings until truth and legend have become indistinguishable. Perhaps it was this very elder who once faced such a creature, or perhaps it was their teacher, or their teacher's teacher. The line of transmission reaches back beyond memory, each storyteller adding their own touches while preserving the essential core that makes the tale worth preserving. As the tale unfolds, people lean in without realizing it. Bodies that were scattered and relaxed begin to form a tighter circle, drawn by invisible threads of attention and curiosity. They stop fidgeting with their clothing, stop rearranging their seating, stop the small restless movements that mark daytime activity. They stop whispering side conversations to neighbors, stop checking on children, who are now transfixed by the unfolding narrative. Even the youngest ones hush, their usually boundless energy channeled into the act of listening, their eyes wide with the particular absorption that children bring to stories that speak to their deepest fascinations. The only sounds are the voice, the fire, and the occasional shuffle of someone drawing a fur tighter around their shoulders as the night air begins to seep into the cave's edges. Outside, the world continues its own rhythms. Night birds calling to each other across the darkness. Small creatures rustling through undergrowth. The distant howl of predators beginning their nocturnal hunts. But here, in this circle of light and warmth, time moves differently, measured not in heartbeats or breaths, but in the careful progression of narrative, the building of tension, the satisfaction of revelation. You've heard this story before, but you don't mind. The details always shift a little, like a river that follows the same course, but never carries exactly the same water. This time, the mammoth tricks the hunters by changing direction at the last moment, using its ancient wisdom to read the wind and the placement of hidden spears, turning what should have been a trap into an embarrassing failure. Last time you heard it, the great beast disappeared into a mist that smelled like old bones and wet thunder, vanishing so completely that some hunters wondered if they had been pursuing a spirit rather than flesh and blood. Both versions are impossible by daylight logic. Both feel absolutely true in the flickering dance of firelight and shadow. The elder's voice rises and falls with the natural rhythm of breath and emphasis, pausing at moments of high tension, dropping to barely above a whisper for the most crucial revelations. Their hands move as they speak, not in grand theatrical gestures, but in the subtle movements of someone who has lived the experiences they describe. The careful positioning of a spear, the way one might approach a suspicious track, the exact angle at which a mammoth might turn its massive head to regard a too bold hunter. When the mammoth finally vanishes into the forest, leaving behind only broken traps and wounded pride, the elder pauses, letting the silence hold the moment in place like amber preserving ancient life. The fire pops softly, sending up a small shower of sparks that drift lazily upward before winking out. Someone's breathing has deepened into the regular rhythm of approaching sleep. A child shifts position, snuggling deeper into a parent's embrace. The pause stretches, comfortable and complete, allowing the story to settle into memory before the next tale begins. Then the elder looks toward a younger clanmate and raises a brow. That's the signal. No words are needed, no formal passing of authority. Everyone understands the ritual, the way storytelling flows from one voice to another, like water finding its level. The torch passes. A younger voice picks up where the last left off, not to continue the same story, but to offer a new one entirely. This tale is sillier, lighter, recognizing that the mood has been properly set and can now afford to play, to experiment with humor and absurdity. It's about a bird that flies backward to avoid awkward conversations with other birds, and a squirrel that stores fire instead of nuts, leading to predictably chaotic results when winter comes and the creature's tree becomes a blazing beacon visible for miles around. The storyteller is one of the middle generation, old enough to command respect, but young enough to remember what it feels like to be the audience rather than the performer. Their voice carries a different quality than the elders, less weathered, more energetic, with a playful undertone that suggests they're enjoying the telling as much as the listeners are enjoying the hearing. They embellish freely, adding sound effects and brief character voices that make children giggle and adults smile despite themselves. You find yourself grinning at the image of the confused squirrel, frantically trying to blow out its burning nest while other woodland creatures flee in panic. It's ridiculous, impossible, and yet it carries its own logic, its own truth about the unexpected consequences of trying to change the natural order of things. Even the old ones smile, though they try not to show it too obviously, maintaining the dignity expected of those who have earned the right to sit closest to the fire's heart. A child leans against your leg, too tired to sit upright, too curious to sleep just yet. Their small body radiates warmth through the layered furs and leather they wear, and you can feel the subtle changes in their breathing that mark the transition from active listening to drowsy attention. You rest your hand on their back, feeling the small rise and fall of their breath, the steady beat of a heart that has never known anything but safety and belonging. They're warm. So are you. So is the cave, glowing with stories and firelight, and the accumulated presence of people who have chosen to spend their evening hours not in solitary pursuits, but in this ancient communion of shared narrative. The second storyteller brings their tale to a satisfying conclusion, with the squirrel finally learning to appreciate the nuts it had scorned, and the other forest creatures cautiously returning to their charred but still standing home. The moral is gentle and obvious, the kind of lesson that children can absorb without feeling lectured. Adults can appreciate without feeling patronized. Someone adds more wood to the fire. Just a little. Just enough to keep the flame speaking in quiet murmurs, to maintain the circle of light that defines the story space without overwhelming it with too much brightness or heat. The logs settle with a soft creak, releasing their own small shower of sparks. Some drift up like silent insects and disappear into the night, while others settle onto the stone hearth, glowing briefly before fading to dark specks of ash. The smoke curls in lazy patterns toward the vent, and for a moment, you can imagine it's carrying the stories up to the stars, just in case someone out there, in some other cave or camp or settlement, wants to hear them too. A third voice joins the circle now, belonging to someone of your own generation, a person whose childhood you remember, whose coming of age you witnessed, whose own children now lean against your legs and shoulders as they fight sleep. This storyteller chooses a tale that bridges the gap between the elder's grave wisdom and the younger person's playful humor. It's about a spirit who lives in the ash pile and only comes out if you forget to thank the flame before banking the fire for the night. The tale is absurd on its face. The spirit is described as no bigger than a child's thumb, with hair made of soot and eyes like tiny coals, whose greatest power is to make people sneeze at inconvenient moments. And yet, when you glance toward the glowing embers, when you see the way ash shifts and settles seemingly on its own, when you remember mornings when the fire seemed reluctant to catch despite dry wood and careful kindling, you find yourself murmuring a quiet word of gratitude anyway, just in case, just to be safe. Because in a world where so much depends on things beyond human control, it costs nothing to acknowledge the forces that make survival possible. Historians, still wonder when this started. This nighttime storytelling, this ritual of flames and memory that seems as old as humanity itself. Did it begin with warning cries and evolve into legends? Did it serve primarily to pass on hunting tips and survival knowledge, wrapped in narrative to make crucial information easier to remember? Did it evolve from the need to explain the unexplainable, to give shape and meaning to forces beyond human understanding? Maybe it was simply what people did once the work was done, when the darkness came, and the only thing to do was gather around something that felt alive, and pretend the night wasn't as long and empty and potentially dangerous as it actually was. The stories taper slowly, like the fire itself. The rhythm becomes more leisurely, the pauses longer, the voices softer. A few people begin to drift off to their sleeping places, moving quietly so as not to disturb those who remain. A child lets out a long, satisfied sigh in their sleep, the sound of someone whose day has been full enough to leave them deeply content. Someone near the back of the cave begins humming, a soft, tuneless thing that feels more like a thought-given voice than an actual song. It fills the silence gently, like moss growing on stone, natural and unobtrusive, but somehow essential to the complete picture. You remain by the fire. You always do, not just tonight, but most nights, drawn by something you can't quite name. Not because you have to. The fire is well banked, safe to burn low through the night, tended by others who share the responsibility. Not because you're afraid of the dark or reluctant to seek your own rest, But because there's something sacred in this hour, this moment when the day has folded itself shut like a flower closing its petals, and the dreams haven't yet begun to unfold in sleeping minds. The warmth here isn't just heat generated by burning wood. It's memory made tangible, the accumulated presence of all who have sat in this same spot, listening to these same kinds of stories, feeling the same mixture of contentment and wonder that comes from being part of something larger than individual experience. It's the echo of voices from the other side of the cave, telling stories that might be forgotten by morning, but feel like everything that matters right now. In this suspended moment between day and night, between waking and sleeping, between the solid facts of survival and the infinite possibilities of imagination, you glance up and catch the last spark drifting skyward, too small to light anything, too persistent to vanish easily. It rises steadily, a tiny orange point against the darkness, carrying with it something essential and indefinable, the spirit of the evening. Perhaps, or simply the physical embodiment of warmth and light and the human need to share both with others. The fire is smaller now, settled into the steady, sustainable burn that will carry it through the night. But it still lives, still breathes, still radiates the warmth that makes this cave a home rather than just a shelter. And so do the stories, whispered and laughed, and stretched like shadows across the stones, becoming part of the place's memory, part of the clan's shared inheritance, part of the long chain of narrative that connects past to present to future. You give the embers one last gentle prod with a fire-blackened stick, not to wake them into new activity, but to let them know you're still here, still grateful, still part of the ancient compact between human and flame that has kept both alive through countless generations. The coals glow more brightly for a moment, then settle back into their steady rhythm, patient and enduring and utterly reliable. Tomorrow will bring new stories, new adventures, new reasons to gather around the fire when darkness falls. But for now, this is enough. This warmth, this presence, this perfect moment of peace in a world that doesn't offer many such gifts. You settle back against your stone seat, close your eyes, and let the fire's gentle murmur carry you toward whatever dreams await. The stories have faded, and the fire has settled into a quiet hum. Most of the others are asleep now, scattered across the softest places in the cave, heads resting on rolled pelts, limbs tucked close, breaths steady and deep. Even the children who usually squirm and whisper long after dark have given in to sleep, their cheeks sticky with soot and their toes peeking out from tangled hides. You're the one still awake, the one sitting upright beside the fire, shoulders cloaked in a warm fur, eyes half-lidded but alert. It's your turn for the night watch. Outside, the world has disappeared. The darkness past the cave mouth is thick and absolute, like someone tipped the earth upward and let the night spill over everything. You can't see the trees, or the river, or the rocks, but you can hear them, the soft rustle of wind moving through leaves, the distant hoot of something with feathers and very strong opinions. Now and then, you catch the creak of a tree trunk shifting, or the muffled padding of paws somewhere too close for comfort. But inside the cave, it's still. It's safe. The fire beside you is no longer a roaring companion. It doesn't crackle or spark like it did during the day. It's a low, warm presence, breathing slowly, as if it too is preparing for sleep. The embers pulse a deep orange, sometimes fading to black before glowing again. They're tired, but not gone. Like you. You poke one gently with the end of a charred stick, more out of habit than need. A small flare rises, barely enough to change the light, but enough to remind you that you're not entirely alone. The fire is still here, watching with you, or letting you watch for both of you. The hours pass slowly. You stop marking time by movement and start marking it by temperature, the slight chill creeping toward your ankles, the warmth that fades from your hands when you don't keep them close to the stones. You add a branch, just one, and listen to the soft sigh it releases as it meets the coals. The warmth returns. Just a little. You glance around at the sleeping forms. They barely stir. One turns over with a grunt. Another curls tighter, burrowing deeper into the fold of a blanket. You're surrounded by people, and yet this moment is entirely your own. You begin to wonder, how many have sat exactly where you sit now? How many hands have hovered over these same coals, blinking back sleep while listening to the same wind slip through the same trees? Maybe not exactly the same wind, but close. Close enough. Historians still puzzle over whether ancient people kept night watches. There's no fossil for vigilance. No bone tells the story of the one who stayed awake while others dreamed. But if you were to guess, if you were to trust your body, your instincts, you'd say yes. There was always someone. Someone like you. Someone who listened for sounds that didn't belong. Someone who kept the fire alive when it wanted to die. Someone who blinked against smoke and shadow and told themselves, just a little longer. The fire isn't just fire anymore. Not at night. It becomes something more. A boundary. A guardian. A promise that even in darkness, something still holds the light. You glance again at the flames and realize how much they resemble breath, rising and falling, flickering like thought. You're not entirely sure which is keeping which alive at this point, you or it. A soft sound breaks the stillness, not a threat, just a whisper of someone dreaming too loudly. You let it pass. There's no danger tonight, not real danger. Only the usual suspects, curious animals, shifting winds, a bit of paranoia. But still, you stay. You hum a little, low in your throat, just for yourself. A wordless tune, one you barely remember learning. Maybe it's a lullaby. Maybe it's just the shape your thoughts take when there's no one left to speak them to. The fire seems to respond, flaring ever so slightly, as if it recognizes the rhythm. You press your hands close to the hearth's edge, rubbing your palms together, warming your fingers. The stone is warm beneath you. The air above it still dances. You stare into the glow until the shapes begin to blur, until you see faces that aren't there, stories that haven't been told yet. The kind of hallucinations that only come when sleep gets too close to waking. You blink slowly, not ready for sleep, but close. Maybe this is what it means to belong to a fire-keeping people. To learn the rhythm of tending something fragile. Something that only survives because you choose not to close your eyes just yet. You think of the children earlier, playing their games, tossing moss into the flame just to see the sparks fly. They don't know yet what it takes to keep it going, but they will. One day, they'll sit here too, humming nonsense into the dark, deciding whether to add one more log or let the fire sleep. The embers shift again, and you stir with them. The wind outside is slower now, calmer. A few of the sleepers begin to stir too, small movements, murmurs, the kind of shuffling that means the night is nearly done. You add a final piece of wood, not for heat, but to leave something behind, something for the next one who wakes. The flame accepts it gladly, curling upward in a graceful arc, then settling again. You lean back and close your eyes just for a moment. You're not sleeping, not really, just resting your eyes. You've done your part. The fire is still burning. And soon, the first hints of dawn will creep across the cave wall, brushing against stone and ash and sleeping faces. You'll feel the warmth of morning, replacing the warmth of flame. And you'll know, quietly, without fanfare, that your watch has ended. But not just yet. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight. From the first frightened hands cradling a spark beneath stormy skies, to the long, smoky nights curled beside a cave wall, listening to stories flicker through generations. From roasted roots and half-burnt mammoth strips to ancient ash piles, still whispering to archaeologists a million years later. A quiet, glowing journey through the warmth that shaped us all. If you're still awake, thanks for keeping the fire company all the way to the end. And if you drifted off somewhere between the ember counting and the root roasting, that's perfectly fine too. That's sort of the magic of it. If you enjoyed this slower, sleep-friendly walk through early human history, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. And if you don't mind sharing, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it was when you pressed play. It's always a joy seeing where these quiet little sparks are landing around the world. For now, I'll let the ashes cool, the night winds settle against stone, and the last of the glowing coals fade into the dark. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time.